If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. The board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. When you speak, clearly state your name and address for the record. All items on the agenda will be open for the public to address before final action is taken. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker, which will be monitored by a timer on the podium. If there's a person speaking on behalf of a group with no other testimony from another member of the group, please identify yourself as such, and your time may be extended at the pleasure of the board. Keep in mind that the chairman has the discretion of limiting the total discussion time on any item. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. It is requested that all cell phones be turned off or put in the silent mode. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thank you, Ann. We'll now move on to our supervisor committee reports. Are there any reports? None? Pardon me, you have a comment? Go right ahead. Supervisor?
I was just mentioning public comment first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped right over that. We're going to go ahead and move to public comment. I'll back up. Public comment is the time that we set aside in each meeting for the public to comment on items that are not agendized for discussion. Do we have anyone that would like to step forward and raise an issue? Please come forward and state your name and where you live, and the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, board, staff, and supervisors. My name is Megan Schlemy, Chillemi. I live at 8819 Cutthroat Avenue in Kings Beach. I made comments yesterday about pending projects, community planning, and NETRAC. This morning, I'd like to talk about my recommendations on NETRAC process. I'm very proud of my NETRAC service and my fellow members, 4 men, 5 women. It's a diverse and young group. I'm the senior member. There's a lot of study on issues and conversation. NETRAC is organized, committed, and respectful. I'm very impressed by the quality and depth of the questions, comments, ideas for improvement, and recommendations. Now to process. NETRAC has no teeth. We get drowned out by the design review committee who represents our recommendations on county staff to planning and the planning commission over 1 hour away on the county's west side. I presented my recommendations for process improvement at NETRAC's March meeting, but was advised it was in the county's purview. That's why I'm here. Number 1, Brown Act. Make it mandatory training on the Brown Act. Just don't throw the handbook at the MAC members or a new appointee. Have the new members read, then county council brief the MAC. There was an unfortunate incident last July when I was attacked publicly in the local newspapers on an issue already discussed by NETRAC, by the North Star representative. In retrospect, it was not against me personally. It was because the other member, who was our newest member, was not educated on the Brown Act. Other NETRAC members, including me, have run afoul of the Brown Act due to lack of education and training. MAC training. Make MAC training mandatory for any new appointee. Just don't distribute the handbook. Proper training is review, test, ask questions, do, and correct. Effective meeting training. Our younger MAC members do not have the 43 years of corporate wars and management training that I do. Give them the essentials of conducting an effective meeting. I bought a book on Robert's Rules of Order for Dummies when I was chair and have passed it down to successive chairs. Public comments. We NETRAC members are very close because most of our meetings are only among ourselves and staff. We're like the Maytag repairman. Very rarely do we have members of the public attending unless we have something controversial.
You can continue.
Okay. Rules, I had an opportunity to attend Incline Village, Crystal Bays, CAB, which is the equivalent there. They had some really neat things. The public doesn't like to speak. They'd rather have a root canal. Give them this form so that they can, or design a form so that they can present their comments and not have to stand up here. Also, is they had a card, is rules for the public to speak. Be concise, clear, 3 minutes, sorry about that, guys, and be respectful. Identify yourself properly. Synergy, Washoe County divides their max into regions. For us, it would be Netrac, Squaw, and Donner Summit. Let's get together with the Auburn staff and improve the process. And teeth, improve the process. Netrac and the max must have the clout and the teeth to be heard, equivalent to design review. We really think that our comments are not heard there. As mentioned, I'm very proud of being a part of the Netrac team. I'm a volunteer. Tahoe is special to us, and we're working very hard to improve our dilapidated neighborhoods and struggling town centers. Help us improve the process. Help us improve the public outreach. And the last thing is thank the Supervisor Montgomery for all your work here in the North Shore, and Jennifer Merchant and executive staff and planning and public works, because the core project and traffic calming in Kings Beach has been fabulous. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak during public comment?
Good morning. My name is Rob Weston, WSTON. I own a small business on the West Shore Sports, and I also represent the West Shore Association in these comments. What's happening to us, other than having a very poor snow year and very poor economic results due to that, of course, looking at a drought season, which is going to be tough for us as well, we've been served with multiple ADA lawsuits, starting with some of the smaller businesses, Tahoe Meadows Cottages, who actually won the Resort Association Hospitality of the Year Award. So obviously they're well aware of taking care of people, including disabled people. However, they've been served a lawsuit, myself, Obexer's Boat Company, Tahoe House Coffee Shop, DM Cafe Coffee Shop, Willard Sports, Alpenglow Sports, Napa Auto Parts. Napa Auto Parts has had to lay off 2 people to pay the $20,000 in fines. So I realize this is beyond your scope, and this is more of a state legislature and a federal legislative issue. However, we need your help. We need your political clout, and that's what I'm asking for, is to have you help us contact our representatives. We've contacted Senator Gaines. We've contacted Congressman McClintock. We've written letters to Senator Feinstein. But we're small local business owners in a very small community. And you're our local government, and we would like to have each of you, if you would be kind enough, to contact your contacts in the political world. We need to have a couple of things changed. First of all, many of our businesses are in 50 and 60-year-old buildings that was discussed yesterday. And these buildings, frankly, are not compliant. We live in a mountainous area. The driveways are hilly. Again, the buildings are old. And we all try to comply as best we can with the proper doorways, restrooms, what have you. But it's tough in this type of environment to comply. So some of those laws may need to be reviewed, and there may need to be some consideration given to these older properties. Secondly, the lawsuits are being filed by a gentleman named Scott Johnson for profit. Mr. Johnson is a paraplegic. He actually sends his staff in to stores. He doesn't go into the stores himself many times. I'm not saying he doesn't, but many times he does not. And he stands to gain profitability, huge profitability. It's been said that in 10 years he's made over $9 million personally. So that's another part of the law that needs to get changed is we don't believe, or I don't believe, and our association doesn't believe, that one person should profit this grossly without donating the money towards ADA compliance, education, maybe small business loans to people that can't afford it, like Napa Auto Parts, that would lay 2 people off. And then the fact that this person profits from this in a gross way is really not right. So those are the 2 parts of the law that I'd like to see us, as a community, get our representatives in Congress to consider changing or reviewing at least. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has a comment on a non-agendized item?
Hi, thank you for being here today. My name is Dr. Ann Sura. My husband Mark and I are property and business owners on North Lake Boulevard in Kings Beach. We are neighbors of Dave Ferrari and the current Crown Motel. I'm a strong believer in property rights, and I'm also really good friends with Dave Ferrari. But I stand here adamantly against locating the Tahoe Expeditionary Academy at the current location of the Crown Motel. I've had the opportunity to review their economic analysis, and if you have not yet done so, it's published on their website, and I suggest that you do. The amount of numbers of revenue that both the county and the community of Kings Beach are going to lose if an educational facility takes over 60 TAUs out of the crown jewel center of our business district is frankly a death knell for our community. I'm a little bit appalled at the Board of Supervisors' stance currently that because this is an allowed use, that there's no place for a discretionary review or open public process relating to this, even though its impact will be felt in our community for years to come via the limiting of options for businesses adjacent to it, such as ABC laws regarding liquor licenses within a certain amount of footage of a school. I was able to attend yesterday's ceremonial groundbreaking at the North Tahoe Event Center. I listened to the speeches about how much community and interagency cooperation went into the Kings Beach Commercial Core Improvement Project. I heard the excitement from Jennifer Montgomery, who was voted to the board in 2008 to represent us up here in the North Shore, about our community's vision and how we came together through adversity to the final plan that's in place today. Most importantly, I heard about how this is the beginning of a revitalization of our town, which has the most beautiful and accessible beach on the North Shore. I heard a lot about safety with improved bike lanes and sidewalks. I listened as the speakers talked about the Kings Beach Town Center, the heart and soul of our business community, and its importance to the project. All that being said, putting a private school, serving their own interests and the interests of their small student body, and in the hopes of bringing in a $30 million in endowment because of their prime location placed in the heart of our business district, taking TAUs off the most beautiful beach in North Tahoe in our community and leaving virtually no viable tourist housing in our town is completely against both the community vision that has been worked on diligently and the purpose of a $50 million revitalization project. From Placer County's own Community Development Resource Agency, the quote is, "The Kings Beach Town Center is considered a catalyst project with the potential for new lodging, retail and office space, a true mixed-use project creating jobs and providing the much-needed support of the existing business community. A private school in the heart of that center does not do that." Placer County has invested tens of millions of dollars of our taxpayer money helping us to plan our future. Help us keep our community vision alive and thriving. Taking the crown jewel from the heart of our town and our commercial core is certain economic death for Kings Beach, and I ask that you look at this much more closely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ellie Waller, Tahoe Vista resident. I wasn't going to speak today, but I come to a lot of these meetings. I research the Placer County staff and agencies on a regular basis, and I want to make a recommendation to help Mr. Weston and some of the other businesses. There's a facade loan program that could be expanded to help reimburse some of these people that have put costs out to date, and then help the people also that still need to do the ADA upgrades. And also the successor agency could look at this as redevelopment and improvements for these small businesses. So I'd like to see staff take on that recommendation to help these folks with some of the loans and reimbursement for ADA. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on a non-agendized item? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to supervisor committee reports. Supervisor Montgomery.
I actually, this is actually not a committee report.
but I wanted to note that following the consent agenda are a couple of items which are designated as for information, and I wanted to point out specifically item number 24, which is an update on the Tahoe area projects. It's available online, and would just strongly recommend that my board and anyone who's interested in seeing the volume and breadth of projects coming forward here in the east end of the county, take a look at that more closely. We won't be addressing it today because it is an informational item only, but I think there's a lot of really important project detail in there.
All right,
That's it.
Thank you. Supervisor Wagner? Supervisor Holmes? Supervisor Euler? Okay. I don't have anything either. We will now move on to our first item, which is item 5A. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Apologize, folks. I just got back from Central America, and I was really surprised and happy that it was raining and snowing here. So I'm a little bit trying to get my equilibrium back. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with the consent agenda. Are there any items that the board would like to pull off the agenda? None? Any items that the public would like to pull off the agenda? Okay, then I'll go ahead and bring it back. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Whitehead?
Yes.
Euler? Montgomery?
Yes.
Duran?
Yes. Great. Now we can move on to item number 5A, award RFQ, approve and renew BPOs and DPW. Mr. Wood and Desiree Belding.
Good morning, Chairman Duran, Supervisors. My name is Brett Wood. I'm your purchasing manager, and with me is Desiree Belding, one of the buyers in the procurement division. We're here today with item 5A, which is a request to approve a competitive request for qualifications, number 10327, for construction management services, construction inspection, material testing, and construction surveying, and adopt a qualified list of firms effective for a 3-year period from May 1st of 2014 through April 30th, 2017. In conjunction with this, we're asking for your approval to initiate blanket purchase orders with several firms, including Somas, Valley Cooper and Associates, HDR Engineering, the Hanna Group, and Nichols Consulting Engineers for these services. These will be used by the Department of Public Works and Community Development, the Planning Division, and they are funded through their existing department's budgets for fiscal year 2013-14 and 14-15 in their proposed budget for 14-15. We're also asking for the ability to renew those blanket purchase orders if they do not exceed the aggregate amount, 10% of the aggregate amount of $1.3 million. And with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Desiree Belding to give you some background on these, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Good morning, members of the board. Desiree Belding with Procurement Services. A little bit of background for this qualified list is the Department of Public Works and the Community Development Planning Division require additional professional services for construction management, construction inspection, materials testing, and construction surveying for various capital improvement projects and public and private land development projects throughout Placer County. During the past several years, the Department of Public Works and Community Development Planning Divisions have utilized blanket purchase orders with various vendors from a previous qualified list. Procurement Services has collaborated with the participating departments to develop a new request for qualifications for the various professional construction services, which would allow the creation of 2 lists. One list would service the western areas of Placer County, while the other list will cover the eastern areas of Placer County. Procurement has solicited this request for qualifications and invited 281 firms to participate. 86 firms reviewed the documents that were presented, and 22 firms responded to the request for qualifications. An evaluation panel was comprised of staff from the Department of Public Works and the Planning Division, which participated in the evaluation process, assisting in the selection of the recommended firms being presented to your board today. And with your approval, 6 of the firms will service the western areas of Placer County, and 6 firms will service the eastern areas of Placer County. And with that said, I'll stand for any questions.
Great. Any questions by the board?
Um,
Supervisor
I-
Montgomery.
I always ask, did we have any Placer County firms that responded to the request? And if so, where were they in our ranking?
Placer County specific? We had numerous Placer County specific firms that responded. I didn't gather approximate total on county specific. I know for this area up here in Tahoe specifically, we had 16 firms that we invited, and only 2 responded.
So 16 were invited and 2 responded?
Correct.
Okay. And the 2 that responded did not meet the qualifications for the award?
They met qualifications, but they did not actually make that list of suggested firms.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion from the board? Great. Any further discussion from the public? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for, do I hear a second? Yes. Oh, okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. While we're here, we'll have Mr. Wood talk to us about item 5B, approved change order bid award to DPW Transit Services.
Thank you, sir. John Manning's joining me also because he has some background with this one. We're requesting at this time your approval to extend and increase an existing blanket purchase order with VPSI of Troy, Michigan for leasing van pool services for the county's van pool program, and to extend the current date of their contract through June 30th of this year. We're also requesting that you approve a new competitive bid to Enterprise Holdings of San Leandro, California for the same service for a 3-year period from July 1st of 2014 through June 30th of 2017 in the maximum amount of $471,000. And we're asking for your approval to authorize renewals of that contract for 2 additional 1-year terms as long as they don't exceed 10% of that aggregate amount. With that, I'll ask Mr. Manning to present some background information, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Good morning, Supervisors. Placer County Transit Division requires an annual blanket purchase order to lease full-size passenger vans for the county's van pool lease program for the Placer County commuters. The department's most recent blanket purchase order expired on March 31st, 2014. Because the department's most recent blanket purchase order represented the last allowable renewal option from the previous competitive bid, Procurement Services developed invitation for bid number 10324, which was solicited via the county's e-procurement platform to 45 potential bidders and was also posted on the county's website. 16 vendors accessed the bid online, and a total of 2 responsive bids were received. The bids were evaluated based on the total cost for the first 3 years of the lease, and Enterprise Holdings was determined to be the lowest responsive bidder. In order to execute a smooth and seamless transition from the most recent blanket purchase order vendor to Enterprise Holdings, we're requesting your board's approval to extend the most recent BPO through June 30th of 2014 and increase it by $55,000, resulting in a new maximum amount of $259,200. We're also requesting your board's approval to award a BPO to Enterprise Holdings in the maximum amount of $471,000 for the period of July 1, 2014 through June 30th, 2017. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Any questions or discussions by the board? Hearing none. Any questions or discussions by the public? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. Great. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Motion carries. And we've got one more. Mr. Wood, item C, review PPOs in multiple departments.
Yes, sir. This is a request from the Procurement Division and the Department of Public Works, as well as several other departments within the county, to authorize the renewal of blanket purchase orders with multiple firms for original equipment manufactured automotive parts and services. These are based both off of a bid that we had conducted last year and negotiated agreements that we had also done. The aggregate amount is $517,500, and it is asking to extend these blanket purchase orders until September 30th, at which point we anticipate doing a new bid and providing some additional, and coming back to the board at that time. So,
Good morning again. The Placer County Fire Department, the Placer County Sheriff's Office, the Department of Public Works Fleet Services Division, and the Department of Facility Services require annual blanket purchase orders for the purchase of original equipment manufacturer, or OEM, automotive parts and dealer services on an as-needed basis. The department's most recent blanket purchase orders expired on March 31st of 2014. The department's requested to renew the agreements for a 6-month term so that procurement services could work on developing a new bid which reflects the department's updated auto parts requirements and dealer service requirements as well. Most of the vendors agreed to renew at the same pricing and terms. A few of the vendors requested adjustments to their discount pricing as well as their shop labor rates, which were determined to be reasonable. Procurement Services requests that the board approve the BPOs be awarded to the vendors that are listed in the agenda item, and the maximum aggregate amount of $517,500 for the period of April 1st, 2014 through September 30th of 2014. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Any questions or discussion from the board? And I do, just a comment, I do see quite a few Placer-based firms that are on this particular list, quite a few. It's very, very good. Any question or discussion by the public? We'll go ahead and bring the item back to the board.
Move approval?
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. I get into got about 3 minutes. We take the sheriff item?
Sure.
Yeah, great. We're gonna move down to item number 7, Placer County Sheriff's Office, Nevada County Office Amendment to the Jail Services Agreement.
Good morning, Chairman Durant, members of the board, Judy Laporte with the Placer County Sheriff's Office. The item before you requests the biannual approval of the agreement between the Sheriff's Office and Placer County and Nevada County for jail services. You initially approved this contract in 2001, and it's proved to be a cost-effective solution to our needs in this region. The dollar amounts cited here, the $396 and the $408, represent a 3% increase year over year, which is in keeping with the cost to provide the services. With approval of this agreement, we will have another 2-year extension, which will carry us through fiscal year 15-16. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Also have Lieutenant John Weaver from the Tahoe station here if you have any questions for him.
Great. Any questions by the board?
I just wanted to mention that this has, as Judy indicated, proven to be very, very effective. Our existing facility up here is really inappropriate for keeping people on any sort of long-term basis, and by long-term I mean more than a day or a few hours. I think this is a really good agreement with Nevada County, and I think it's really served the community well. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the Sheriff's Department for, thinking outside the box and figuring out a way to serve the community, but also to protect public safety at the same time.
Any other questions from the board? I just have a quick question. The contract, were there any substantive changes to it? It's the same
Not at all,
contract?
just the dollars, amount, and the date.
Great, okay, great. I'll go ahead and any questions from the public? Hearing none, I'll bring this back to the board.
Move approval.
Great. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any disapprovals? Any abstentions? Hearing none, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Now we'll move on.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. We're now going to move to our 9:30 timed item. Facility service, garbage collection fee increase, franchise areas 2 and 3. Kevin Bell.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Duran, members of your board. I'm Kevin Bell, the Environmental Engineering Program Manager with Facility Services. I have 3 actions for your board today. The first is to conduct a public hearing to receive input on proposed garbage collection fee adjustments in franchise area 2 and 3 which include unincorporated Placer County east of Colfax to the Nevada state line. Second, approve an amendment with Placer County Eastern Regional Sanitary Landfill, Inc. and Tahoe Truckee Disposal Company for solid waste handling services to incorporate increased processing fees and adjusted garbage collection fees charged to the public for fiscal year 2014-15. This will result in no increase to tipping fees at the material recovery facility and increases of up to 2.6% for garbage collection services with no net county cost. Third, make a finding pursuant to section 21080B8 of the Public Resource Code that the collection fees are derived directly from the cost of providing services and are necessary to meet operating expenses required for maintenance and service, or maintenance of service, and are therefore exempt from environmental review. We have worked with this company for approximately 25 years to operate the MRF and formerly the landfill and to provide garbage collection services in the area. And they've been a very good partner over the years, and in fact, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've worked very closely with them to keep rates as low as possible in this area. And your board has taken several actions to actually decrease the amount of the fee that the county charges for its piece to manage the material recovery facility and the county solid waste programs. And TTD and ERL have waived and deferred increases, resulting in no tipping fee increases since 2008 at the MRF, and between a 2.9% and 6.3% increase in garbage collection fees, including this proposed rate increase since 2008 for the garbage collection fees. As I stated earlier, there are no adjustments to the current material recovery facility tipping fees proposed. And under the terms of the agreement, ERL, the operator of the facility, is entitled to a 26-cent per ton or 0.61% COLA and to the material recovery facility processing fees, and a 44-cent per ton or 3% increase to the disposal fees paid at the Lockwood landfill. And rather than raise tipping fees to customers at the Eastern Regional Material Recovery Facility, staff proposes to absorb the increased processing fee and the disposal fee increase paid at the Lockwood landfill in the Eastern Regional Landfill fiscal year 2014-15 budget. The garbage collection fees have 3 separate components. First is the service component, which is a cost to go out and actually pick up the trash at the curb. Second is the disposal component, which is a cost to tip the garbage at the facility, process it, and then transport the residue for disposal at the Lockwood landfill. And the third piece is a special fee of 4%, which funds the county's solid waste management programs. The service fees charged by TTD for collecting the garbage are proposed to increase per the terms of the agreement, which result in a COLA for fiscal year 2014-15 of 0.61%. However, 2 years ago, TTD agreed to defer what would have been a 5.65% COLA and split that over 2 years, last year and this year. And when we add that 2.81% COLA from 2 years ago to the 0.61% COLA this year, we arrive at a 3.42% COLA applied to just the service portion of the collection fee. As I stated earlier, we are not proposing any changes to the disposal fee that's part of that garbage collection fee, and then also are not planning any changes to the special fee, which is essentially the franchise fee paid to the county. The proposed fees are shown in Exhibit B, and as a couple of examples, the monthly single can service is proposed to increase from $21.32 to $22.19 in Area 2, and from $18.81 to $19.29 in Area 3. And the monthly 3 cubic yard commercial service is proposed to increase from $277.82 to $283.16 in Area 2, and $223.03 to $226.50 in Area 3. That's a lot of numbers, I apologize. All of the 15,018 property owners in Franchise Area 3, where garbage collection is mandatory, were mailed a postcard noticing the Franchise Area 3 fee increase and this public hearing. And all of the noticing was done in compliance with Proposition 218 and this hearing. At the close of the public hearing, the clerk of the board will tally all the protests received. Under Proposition 218, if a majority of the property owners submit a written protest, the fees cannot be increased. In order to implement the proposed collection fee increases, your board must conduct a public hearing, and if you agree with staff's recommendation to adjust the fees in accordance with Exhibit B of the staff report, make the appropriate findings and approve the amendment. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions your board has.
Great. Before I open up the public hearing, are there any questions of the board?
Kevin, I really want to thank you. You've been working diligently on this agreement and many others with our solid waste partner up here. I actually reside in Franchise Area 2, and I brought up an issue with Kevin this morning that I just wanted to highlight because I think we do need to figure out how to work through this moving forward, which is I am an e-customer, and so I received no notification, and I certainly would not have objected to it because, frankly, I think TTSD is probably our most reliable utility up here. But I think it's going to be important that we figure out a way that we notice everybody, even in the non-mandatory sections of the county. And so you and I should probably sit down and work through that moving forward. But
Yep.
I have no issues with this. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions of the board? Any other questions of the public before we go into a public hearing? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone from the public would like to come up and discuss this particular matter of garbage collection fee increases in Franchise Area 2 and Area 3? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and before I close the public meeting, I'm going to go ahead and ask the clerk for a preliminary count of the number of protest letters received.
335.
335, okay. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. And I'm going to ask the clerk, are there any additional protests recorded?
No, there are not.
Okay, so the number stays at 335. I'm going to ask the chair, ask the clerk for the final count.
335 protests
Okay,
received.
great. Based on the count, it appears that a majority of the protests does not exist. And I will bring this matter back to the board.
Move approval of the requested actions.
Great. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you, sir. Great. Now, we've got a couple of minutes before we move on to our 9:40 timed item. So,
6B.
yeah, let's go to 6B, Cabin Creek Biomass Facility Update. Mr. Story.
Good morning, Honorable, is that on? I can't tell.
Yes.
Good morning, Honorable Chair and board members. Brett Story, representing a Community Development Resource Agency at this item. Today, I'll provide you an update of the proposed Cabin Creek facility, a request that your board approve material terms for a proposed biochar agreement, authorize the CEDRA director or his designated to negotiate that contract and be brought back to you at a later date, and then request to authorize the chair to approve, or your board to approve and authorize the chair to sign the biomass fuel sale agreement. In 2007, your board directed staff to investigate a biomass facility in the Tahoe region. In May of 2013, your board approved the Cabin Creek Biomass Facility project. Staff has been working with the Tahoe Regional Power Company, or TRPC, to achieve multiple milestones before the project can be funded and finally constructed in this area. The items today represent a majority of those milestones, and I will be happy to walk you through them. And am I moving these? Today, we have some significant news. Tahoe Regional Power Company and its managing director, Greg Stengel, who is here in the back, have met with Liberty Energy and been negotiating a material term sheet for the power purchase agreement. That's a significant event in that as that moves along, that will provide the ability to get funding and actually build the facility. Mike Smart, the CEO of Liberty Energy, apologizes he could not be here today. He needed to go back and talk to his CEO of his parent company in Toronto, Canada. but represents here in good faith. Additionally, one of our partners recently chosen our engine choice, which is General Electric. Tom Marhart of General Electric is also in the back, wanted to be here today to represent their company and to help the project along. Those formal power purchase agreement discussions and approval are going to be starting now and ongoing. Eventually, it'll need to be approved by the California Public Utility Commission. We do not see any issue with that, though this is the type of contract they are looking for, small distributed renewable energy in this region. The detailed design of the facility will now commence and move forward again through TRPC. We're at that point where we're transitioning from the county to our developer. The same TRPC will look to submit those final permits for the design, as well as to the Air Pollution Control District for the permits to actually operate and do the analysis to make sure all the emissions fall in line with our environmental work that's been done. And as you all know, but some in the audience may not, the location is right up here, which is on 267, somewhere between Truckee and Squaw Valley. It's at the previously discussed Eastern Regional Landfill site. It's just outside of the landfill, and I think it will make a fine facility. Just to go through a little bit about what we're asking you today, and all three of these things are all interconnected, and it's in that vein that I bring you all this information so you understand everything that you're agreeing to today and what we hope you would agree to later when contracts are brought back, because they're all intertwined. It helps mitigate and lower the risk for both TRPC as well as the county to make sure this project works. On the biochar agreement, the material tons, we'll purchase 500 tons of the biochar annually, which represents about a third of what the facility will actually produce. TRPC would own the other 2/3. The term of that contract is 10 years with extensions that both parties must agree to. That represents about $350,000 in payments annually, and that's 500 tons at $1,500.80 a ton, generally what the price is for today selling. The 10-year contractual commitment, if the price stayed as it is, our commitment could be made back in as little as 5 years, or it could take 10 years. But I'm just suggesting that we've done the economic analysis. That's the high end of it. On the low side, if prices were to fall, TRPC is going to guarantee that more material, and up to double that amount, would be given to the county to mitigate our risk on that side if the price is less than the $1,580 per ton, again, to mitigate the risk. From TRPC's side, they will package this biochar material at regular intervals, which is about every 2 days. Standard terms of all our contracts. There is also a fiscal incentive for TRPC to move that material. In other words, we're providing them a fiscal opportunity to sell it quicker, and that way it doesn't sit idle with anybody. Then the market is actually pretty good right now. We're helping them look for new markets for it as well. Any questions on that one? I'll move on. What do we got up here? Still on the biochar. Okay, fuels last. This is the investment agreement, which is going to be between TRPC and the county. The county will contribute $1.5 million of remaining Department of Energy grant funding. As you may recall, we saved that half of it so that if we built the facility, it would be there and available for a developer to build it. If we did not build it, we could refund that to the United States government and save taxpayers money that way. The original DOE grant funds was about $3 million. The term of this agreement would be until repaid. There is a schedule for payments, but it all depends on some things which I'll go over here. The county has utilized the first $1.5 million in DOE funds to date, including the design and all of the environmental work and everything else that's gone into this project. Placer County and its partners have contributed another estimated $1 million plus in matching in-kind services, the salary of myself. Many other departments within the county have been representative on this project and done an outstanding job in supporting both the county and our team members. On the TRPC side, they will repay the investment plus to Placer County over time, and what we've said is $2 million to repay the 1.5 because it's over time. Payments to Placer County will have identical treatment to other equity investors that Mr. Stengel is bringing forward. It's based upon a mutual agreement of cash flow percentage, which is to be determined. We'll work that out in the contract, but we will look towards other similar agreements of this same type. Annual payments will be made until investment return is achieved, and that's if that cash flow calculation allows. In other words, we may have to skip a year to make sure that the business is doing what it's supposed to do and generate electricity at a proper intervals, including the power purchase agreement for Liberty. And I'll stop there for any questions on that.
I did actually have a question on the repayment of investment. As you know, a couple of us sit on the Air Pollution Control District, and they've contributed some portion of the project dollars. I'm not quite sure what offhand. Is the intent to, in the same manner, repay their investment as well?
No, because those were clean air grant funds that they have put forth on this project. The people who worked, we actually paid from the Bruce Springsteen, who's been a great member of the team. We actually paid him through Department of Energy funds as it's been going forward. And I've actually set aside a little money to also continue to use his services. So we're paying as we go, so to speak. But the clean air grant funds, which are as you know, funds that we did projects for, those weren't specific to Cabin Creek. However, the results of the analysis we did on those helped us put together this package.
Okay.
But really, the idea is to utilize these funds to make sure that the county, as you'll see in the next slide, which is our fuel agreement, to make sure that the county performs its role of maintaining a lower cost fuel, and to make sure that all of those conditions in the conditional use permit, which your board approved in May of 2013, are followed, and that the program is worked and continuing working with all of our partner agencies in the region.
Yeah, I guess I'm just not really seeing the distinction between the $1.5 million in DOE funds that the county contributed versus the CAG funds. So maybe that's something we can talk about at a later date.
Yes, sure, we can do
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Any other?
Yes.
No, what?
I don't think,
Okay,
no, I think
sorry.
we're good.
And then I must have skipped the fuel agreement. I apologize. It's out of order in my own package. The fuel agreement, which is today what you're being asked to approve, actually is the only agreement. Placer County will provide up to 17,000 bone-dry tons, which is the common measurement for biomass, of ground biomass annually, at $25 per bone-dry ton, an estimated revenue of about $425,000. The term on that contract, again, identical to what I stated earlier, it will be 10 years with extensions that'll be agreed to by both parties. Coincidentally, our estimate is that it'll be about a $425,000 cost to the county to make all this happen. And the way that breaks down, an example might be, we've done some analysis, and the cost for this Tahoe City area to grind and deliver to Cabin Creek is about $18 a bone-dry ton. But if we're going to take it from South Lake, we've got a longer drive, we've got some different conditions over there, it'll cost about $30. So what we've looked at is a blended price model that's about $25 per bone-dry ton. Again, some of those dollars I talked about earlier from a development agreement would make sure that we were always able to meet that cost in that. We currently have a master stewardship agreement, which is essentially a cost-sharing agreement, which your board approved in 2011, and I've brought back subsequent agreements that we've been working. We have another one coming this year, by the way, of a project here. With the Forest Service at the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. Currently negotiating with the U.S. Forest Service Tahoe National Forest for a very similar agreement, because as you know, the Tahoe National Forest is right out the door, and we would be also getting material from them, and they have lots to do, so we'll do that. Also had some discussions with California State Parks and California Tahoe Conservancy. They are interested in a very similar type contract, as well as many of the local PUDs, fire agencies. And in fact, Liberty Energy has the similar type of idea to help us get all this material. As you know, no one knows what to do with it. Often it is burned in open piles, and that's what this project is about. Later on this year, or early next year, we will hopefully bring back to your board, and we'll go out for an RFP, and we'll bring back local contractors that would be actually doing all this work of actually going out in the forest and grinding this material and hauling it to the Cabin Creek facility. On the TRPC side, they would obviously purchase the biomass material. Generally, it's very standard terms of all our contracts. This one has one exception. We allowed for a 90-day payment process because what happens is, because of the weather, we are required to deliver a full winter's worth by November, December. That means fuel sits idle, cash flow goes idle for TRPC, and we actually built that into the model to say that we could take a 90-day delay on those payments to reach the $25 a bone dry ton cost. So it's essentially built into that cost. And I will stop there and answer any questions, should there be any,
Any questions to the board?
on that one?
Yes, Supervisor Euler.
Yeah, clearly, this is where our potential jeopardy exists, is this obligation to deliver the 17,000 tons. I mean, conceivably, with an executive order, our access to much of the area around the lake could be frozen for recovery of these materials that would have to be delivered. Do we have any kind of out in the event of some kind of regulatory order or executive order beyond our authority? Or do we have to then figure out where we are going to acquire that material and truck it in from elsewhere?
I'll answer that a couple different ways. One is we have backup options for material, which is why we're not just doing from the lake, because the lake, sometimes it's more sensitive to those things. We have a second forest. All of the fire departments, we have Nevada County Fire as well. So we have the opportunity to collect more material. Within the contract, there is a rule that exists that should we not meet the supply, TRPC has the authority to go get a very similar supply. But it is our intent that we would, because of the conditional use permit action, that we would actually go out and find that material. Again, that money that would help mitigate the risk on the development agreement side would be used to make sure that we always meet that agreement. Jerry, I'm not quite understanding, or I'd have to go back through the contract itself to know whether there was an out clause.
No, I didn't see one.
I don't think we have one then.
Okay. So the other areas from which we can obtain fuel, proximity to the Cabin Creek obviously affects total cost when you're looking at the cost per ton delivered. Where are we talking about drawing from?
We are talking about within 30 miles of the Cabin Creek facility. The analysis that was done a couple of years back showed that we actually have an excess. There is, within 30 miles of the facility, there is a annual known quantity of about 117 bone dry tons, of which at its peak, when Loyalton was running, about 40,000 bone dry tons were used. So we're talking about only a percentage of that. We actually went back and looked at that. That 117 represents everything that's out there, and we actually walked many of the properties with the Forest Service and our consultant to determine if we get rid of the tougher areas, the most expensive areas, what's left behind. There's still approximately, I believe, 45,000 annual bone dry tons of available material near roads with easier NEPA guidelines. So we don't feel like there's any risk as far as meeting this obligation. The other thing is that in further analysis, we put 17 bone dry tons of delivery because that's what we did in the environmental work. The new engines, our engine partners got a much more efficient engine, so we believe that we'll actually be under that amount and that it won't reach that height. It's probably somewhere between 13 to 15,000 bone dry tons annually.
Now, just for clarification, when you say that, what you're saying is that with less fuel, we will generate more kilowatt hours?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, more efficient engines.
So we don't need necessarily the 17,000 bone dry tons?
We don't, but
in
again,
order-
it's
okay.
it's what was analyzed, and it's what the maximum amount could be based on the CEQA that was done.
All right.
CEQA and NEPA. I forgot to mention, on that note, we did receive information from the Department of Energy that the NEPA has also been completed on this project, so that's another milestone that was reached. I apologize, I didn't put that in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got a follow-up question to Supervisor Euler's area of inquiry. That 30 miles, is that a limitation on where you can draw
No, sir. It
So-
it is
so we
an,
don't-
it was an economic analysis that was done.
Okay.
We actually looked out even 50 miles, but we wanted to look at, basically what the 30 miles comes from, we've done a number of projects in the county, and what we've come to find out that is if you limit yourself to 30 miles, you can control your costs, particularly the diesel engine costs of trucking is really where the cost goes haywire. So we looked at the analysis from how can we limit the cost and get something fixed that's relatively low risk. But no, we could go further than that. Our only
Okay,
limitation
good.
is 100% forest material as one of the conditional use permit,
Okay.
which is why we started this in the first place, to
Yeah, I was just curious.
avoid burning
because
piles.
Unlike, so it's unlike a power or water, we're not limited to a geographic area where we can pull
No, sir.
from. So
It's about economics.
it's about, okay, great. So our costs obviously go up
Correct.
outside of the 30-mile
Correct.
radius. The other question I had was in section 1.4.3, the green attribute credits. What is the likelihood of the county receiving carbon credits for the
Well-
delivery of biomass fuel?
I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that. I'm not in the legislature or the Air Resources Board, but essentially, projects are moving forward through the legislature that would look at conditions such as these that would allow a carbon credit or a green credit to be sold and rewarded, and the income from that could come back. What we know of these things moving forward, in fact, Tom Christoff, our Air Pollution Control Director, is intimately involved in some of these discussions and promoting these things. Since we don't know the price, but we believe something is going to happen, we wanted to include that in the contract to benefit both parties. I would only be guessing to say when
No,
and
that's
how
fine.
much.
I appreciate the fact that that's in there. So go ahead and proceed.
And I think just that our goal is to be operational in 2016. I did want to provide Greg Stengel an opportunity to say a few words, if you'd like to, Greg.
Certainly. Well, Supervisor, Chairman, good morning. Delighted to be back in front of you again today to give you a bit of an update about the progress we've made in making this project a reality. Delighted to be doing that on Earth Day. As you heard, the big step forward that we took was reaching an agreement with Liberty, the big elephant in the room, on material terms for a power purchase agreement. That still has yet to be turned into a power purchase agreement, a contract. That will take time. They've got a bit more of an administrative hurdle to climb, and that's done in partnership with the California Public Utilities Commission. So that is yet to be done, but we have agreed in principle a number that I think we're all very comfortable that we can live with, and allows this project, when combined with the lease and the fuel agreement, allows us to be successful. Again, I just wanted to take this opportunity to congratulate you on, this is going to be California's first forest bioenergy facility. It'll be our third as a company, and really what has made that possible is the county's novel use of the Master Stewardship Agreement in partnership with the Forest Service. This is now being applied as a model on several other projects we are working on, specifically the town of North Fork, the town of Wilseyville, and now in Camptonville, are all actively pursuing, if you will, what we are calling the Placer model of the problem with forest bioenergy is the fuel. And how do you achieve that supply? So again, congratulations to the county, and we certainly are delightfully excited to be doing this project. And when Brett says 2016, what he means is the beginning of 2016. So with that, I'd be delighted to take any questions. Again, thanks to GE, our engine partner, for being here today. We're really grateful with how they've stepped up to join in this project.
Great, thank you. Any questions of the board?
I did. Greg, before you leave, I really want to thank you for all your efforts on this. You've been just a terrific partner to work with, and I'm delighted to see this moving forward. And Brett, your efforts on this have been absolutely invaluable. We are trying to coordinate something for this summer as some sort of groundbreaking ceremony. And I guess my question is about timing. And I know that we're now, because we've chosen the technology, which is GE, that we can get to the detailed design and get to putting in an application for a permit with the Air Pollution Control District. Any idea what sort of time frame is associated with those two pieces?
Yes, well, I met with Mr. Christoph on Thursday of last week. So we believe, and again, I'm not really the person to speak on behalf of the Air District, but we believe about 2 months would be required for getting through that process. I'll tell you, the first one we did with the San Joaquin Valley APCD took 9 months. The second one we did with the San Joaquin Valley APCD took 4 months. So we're hopefully trending in the right direction, but it is a permit process, and it only counts when you get your paper.
Okay. Because obviously it would be pretty important to have those agreements and that permit in place for any kind of groundbreaking this summer.
Correct, as that power purchase agreement. But we feel fundamentally we're on track. I think an August timeframe was what I've heard talked about, and I think we're fundamentally on track to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any further questions from the board? Good job, Brett. Any further questions from the public? Brett, go ahead.
Oh, well, we're back to, if we could, a couple of board action items to approve the material terms for the biochar purchase, and then authorize the C director or his designee to negotiate that, and then to approve the biomass fuel sale and delivery agreement.
Great, then I'll go ahead and bring that back to the board.
Move approval of the item.
Second.
Great, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention?
Thank you, board.
Motion carries. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move forward to our 9:45 timed item. This is a county executive economic development item, the North Tahoe Business Association presentation regarding the current status of the North Tahoe Business Association.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Morning, Dave.
Dave Snyder, Office of Economic Development. This morning we have an informational presentation regarding the current status of our North Tahoe Business Association. NTBA's mission is to improve the economic vitality and quality of life in the communities of North Lake Tahoe, with specific focus on Carnelian Bay, Tahoe Vista, Kings Beach, and Crystal Bay. NTBA implements the 4-point Main Street approach and accomplishes its mission through leadership, advocacy, collaboration, communication, marketing, and special events. So today's NTBA update, sounds like a radio station thing, will be given by our Executive Director, Joy Doyle, who I believe has now been at the helm about 2.5 years.
Correct.
So with no further ado, take it away, Joy.
Thank you, Dave. You stole some of my introduction. Good morning, members of the board. I'm Joy Doyle, Executive Director of the North Tahoe Business Association, and thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to provide you with this update. 2014 marks our 35th anniversary, and we have been partnering with Placer County to implement the Main Street 4-point approach in Carnelian Bay, Tahoe Vista, Kings Beach, and Crystal Bay since 2004, so 10 years. Since then, we have effectively leveraged Placer County's investment through thousands of volunteer hours, and we've raised thousands of dollars from external sources. We've also increased our organizational capacity. Last spring, NTBA welcomed 2 new talented staff members. While we transitioned new staff, we produced impressive results. Now that NTBA has appropriate staffing levels, our productivity is set up for success and sustainability. NTBA had very little board turnover this year. More than half of our board is serving a second term. This provides valuable continuity. 7 NTBA members expressed interest in serving on the board for the 1 available seat that we had. Such low turnover and high interest in serving on our board speaks to the health of the organization. 2013 was the first year of executing our 3-year strategic plan. It is ensuring that the board, staff, and committees are all on the same page with our goals, strategies, and priorities. The following examples are key accomplishments and programs that NTBA has been working on recently. Yes, it's finally happening. KBCCIP construction has begun, and we are excited that the transformation of Kings Beach is underway. However, we know that the next 2 years of construction is not going to be easy on local businesses. We're doing everything we can to lessen the construction impacts, and we want to act as a resource to our business community. To this end, and thanks to Placer County funding, NTBA is executing a KBCCIP business mitigation strategy. We are putting the finishing touches on an Open for Business marketing campaign. The goal is to remind visitors and locals that Kings Beach is open for business, and we still offer everything that they love about the area. It encourages them to visit, recreate, spend money, and have fun in Kings Beach despite construction. The campaign is scheduled to run late May through September, and with continued Placer County funding, the campaign will run in construction year 2 as well. In addition, NTBA compiled and distributed a Tips for Success guide to our members earlier this month. The guide provides valuable resources and positive tips and ideas to help businesses succeed during construction. It is designed to empower businesses to be proactive and take control of their outcomes. The guide lives on NTBA's website as a PDF so that we can update it as needed. However, I have provided the county clerk with copies for each of you. I encourage you to read it and provide me with your input. I think it came out really nice, and so far the feedback from our business community is very positive. In partnership with corporate member Charter Business, NTBA has offered 6 quarterly free small business seminars since 2012, early 2012. We feature local speakers on relevant topics that have an average attendance of 37 people. We find the seminars as an excellent recruitment and member training tool. NTBA allocates significant resources towards 14 successful annual special events, and we assist with several others as well. The members of NTBA and the community as a whole see tremendous tangible results from these efforts. Events create vitality, a sense of place, draw visitors, and believe it or not, accounted for 35% of NTBA's income last year. A main focus of our promotions and marketing committee recently was to improve NTBA's website. The goal was to bring more traffic to the site through search engine optimization, which in turn brings visibility and traffic to our members. The site now targets visitors and easily provides them with North Lake Tahoe and member information. We completely redesigned the homepage, added blogging opportunities, improved the calendar and member directory, which is now searchable. The improved site launched in February, and in the first month, we have doubled our visits, unique visits, page views, and average visit duration. As a result of the new website, we revised our member benefits, and we are constantly striving to improve the value of membership. Excuse me. Years ago, a local artist had the idea that because of KBCCIP, there was an opportunity to install at the same time infrastructure to support public art in Kings Beach. For the past 24 months, NTBA's design committee volunteers and its passionate chair, who's here today, Steve Miller, have been working on a public art program to start in Kings Beach and eventually expand throughout North Lake Tahoe. We believe a local public art program can help diversify and improve North Lake Tahoe's tourism economy. It is well documented that the arts net positive economic results. NTBA recently signed an MOU with North Tahoe Arts, with Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation acting as our fiscal agent. The MOU lays the groundwork for the public art program, and we are ready to execute a work plan which will culminate in permanent art installations in each of the 2 new Kings Beach roundabouts in fall 2015. Next, we plan to feature temporary art installations in Kings Beach locations that rotate every 12 to 18 months thereafter. While it makes sense for the public art program to incubate in NTBA's design committee, in 2 to 3 years, it is our goal that North Tahoe Arts will solely manage this program. We have been successful at expanding our organizational capacity in a variety of ways, including ending last year with 170 members, which represents a 14% increase. This is particularly impressive considering the staffing transitions that we underwent. And now 40% of NTBA's members are at the corporate and premier level, compared to only 21% in 2011. And as a result, membership income has increased 24% since 2011 and 34% since 2008. NTBA ended 2013 financially secure, in part due to event sponsorship income, which totaled nearly $40,000 in cash and in-kind contributions by local businesses and corporate brands such as Safeway and Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. Our overall revenue increase was 9% last year. Between meetings, events, and additional work, NTBA's 104 volunteers contributed over 1,500 hours last year. This is one of the ways we effectively leverage Placer County's investment. Looking ahead, NTBA will continue with ongoing Main Street implementation efforts while focusing on executing the Open for Business campaign, launching the new North Tahoe Public Art Program, and exploring and acquiring new funding sources. We want to play an active role in North Tahoe's transition into the future with opportunities that are being provided through the new regional plan and community plan updates, through KBCCIP improvements, and redevelopment efforts, including assisting with catalyst projects in Kings Beach. We are currently working with staff on NTBA's proposed 2014-15 scope of work, which has expanded to include compiling a baseline business assessment tool. We believe it will support the proactive redevelopment efforts the county is beginning to work on. We have a proven track record of success with this type of effort, as demonstrated by our assisting with the passing of the Benefit Assessment District a few years ago. We feel positive momentum taking hold. We represent the business community and strive to continue to be an important player in helping to shape the future of North Lake Tahoe. We look forward to Placer County's ongoing and increased support of our mission to improve economic vitality and quality of life in the communities of North Lake Tahoe. And with that, I will take any questions you may have.
Any questions of the board? No comments?
I just really want to take the opportunity, Joy, to say thank you and to thank you to all your volunteers and your members, because you really have stepped up the opportunities and the events in North Lake Tahoe, in the Kings Beach and Tahoe Vista area particularly. And as you know, I participate in many, if not most of them. I see increasing crowds, increasing visitors, not just locals. I mean, this is drawing folks in from out of the area. I know people who come up early to make sure they're there for Friday night music on the beach. And I just really want to give full credit to you guys for being such a great partner and really focusing on the economic viability of your area.
Thank you very much.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your actually dynamic leadership in this effort. I know you called me a couple years ago saying,
Yeah.
hey, we've got to do something about when the businesses are closed, and this is really an extraordinary presentation, so I really appreciate
Thank you.
what you do.
Thank you.
Supervisor Euler? No. Any questions, comments from the public? Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
We will now move on to our 10 a.m. Item. It's County Executive item, North Lake Tahoe Resort Association, Sandy Evans Hall.
Good morning, Honorable Chair and Board of Supervisors, and it was our pleasure and honor to host you last night at our reception. I hope you have a wonderful time while you're here in North Lake Tahoe, as always. We're going to talk to you a little bit today about the winter marketing campaign that we just did. We had a very challenging winter, but before I get started, I wanted to ask Supervisor Montgomery, do you still need a little bit of an update on our wayfinding signage piece?
We did speak briefly after the meeting yesterday, and my concern was alleviated, which is I wanted to make sure that the community plan teams were coordinating their efforts as it related to signage with the existing programs that we have, because I really didn't want to have two results at the end of two different processes. So,
Okay.
thank you.
And the rest of the
I think we're
board
good.
feels okay. Okay, good. Then we can move forward here. We're going to start out with the very first slide today. Let's see. Is a lot of numbers, so I want to point you to a couple of numbers that I think are really significant. First of all, on the first quarter TOT, here we are, this 4,616,000 is really a record for that first quarter, July, August, and September that we have ever had. So historic record for this last first quarter of the year. I think with the Ironman event that we put in September, we had a Tough Mudder event, we had quite a few things that kind of compressed our business from September even into October. And what we found was this was the highest that we'd ever received. Last year, 12-13, was a historic record year for TOT collections, and as you see, we surpassed first quarter by 16%, so that's significant. As we move into the second quarter, we started to see the lack of snow as we got into the December timeframe. However, what we're seeing right now is that our numbers for the second quarter have surpassed just slightly our numbers for second quarter of last year. Again, reminding you that last year was a record TOT year. As we move into third quarter, that's where I think we're really going to see the impact of the lack of snow and the challenging winter. But what we are seeing is through Decimetrics, which is an entity that we belong to that actually provides comparative measurements for lodging tax receipts, average daily rates, revenue per available room for all of the Western area resort communities, and allows us to see year over year how we're doing. This is an entity that right now what we're seeing is in November through April, we saw a 4.9% decrease in occupancy. We expected this. In fact, we actually expected quite a bit more than this, and I think we're pleased that it's only this amount. But what we did see, which is unusual, is this 4.5% increase in average daily rate. Generally what happens in a resort community is when you have a decline in occupancy due to whatever factor, the rates tend to go down as you turn to the consumer to purchase additional occupancy. So you start to offer lower rates, inciting the visitor to come. But what we're seeing is the opposite of that we're actually seeing an increase in our ADR, which is great news for us here. So what that translates in for the hotelier is actually only a 1% decrease in revenue per available room. So that leads us to think that possibly third quarter is not going to be as bad as we had originally thought it could be. In fact, early numbers are right now comparative to last year. We're down about 13% if you just compare February and March to one another, but we're slightly ahead of 2 years ago, which has been our barometer for this winter, that 2 years ago that we had the drought that we experienced again this year. What we're seeing looking forward is that, again, we're still seeing this 5.7% increase in average daily rate, great sign, and we're seeing a 6.5% increase in our revenue per available room as we go from May through September. So that shows that if we build occupancy as we think that is going to come to us, we will have an excellent summer moving forward. And we're planning for that right now, especially with all the events that we have in place and the registration that began just yesterday for our new half Ironman event, which will be on the same day as our full Ironman event, hopefully bringing us a total of about 3,500 participants. So I'm going to turn it over right now to our Chief Marketing Officer, Andy Chapman, to take you through all the things we did this last winter, which I think helped us to stave off the decreases we could have seen had we had no marketing whatsoever. So, Andy?
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Chairman Duran and members of the board, and welcome to Lake Tahoe. It's always great to see you guys up here, and it's appropriate we're talking about winter because I think it's returned for a day or two. A little bit late for what we would like, but nonetheless. So just want to talk a little bit about our winter objectives from a marketing standpoint, and I could spend a couple hours talking to you about everything we're doing. So I'm going to concentrate this presentation today on our consumer marketing efforts and what we do to kind of drive that consumer interaction, consumer engagement. The objectives in our Northern California marketplace was really to sustain our California fan base. And we were doing that through a focus on frequency through key touch points. Particularly for Northern California, the competitive landscape is very aggressive. You have locations such as Whistler with easy flights out of San Francisco up to Canada. Mammoth, who actually is doing a lot of revenue guarantees on their airline, so they have to pay for those seats that are coming out of the Bay Area, so they're very aggressive in filling those planes. Certainly Colorado and Utah, we've seen an increase in Vail's efforts, Colorado Vail, as opposed to Colorado Tahoe. There's a little bit of a difference there, but the Colorado folks in Vail being aggressive, and Utah as well. And then certainly our most closest competitor and partner at times being South Shore is in that market as well. In the Southern California market, due to the carryover, and thank you very much for your continued support in providing that carryover funds to our marketing, we're able to get into the Southern California marketplace this winter as well. And it's really to generate awareness and growth and engage in a social conversation with that marketplace down there. The competitive landscape in LA is really Mammoth, Utah, and Colorado. Some of the techniques that we used, I'm going to go into a little bit more of these in the Southern California and Northern California marketplace. You can see those. In Northern California, it was TV, digital, out-of-home, search, social, and video. In Southern California, it was digital, out-of-home, search, and social. So talking first about television, we were, the strategy around television is brand awareness, is getting people to get us into their consideration set. So that when they're thinking about a trip in the wintertime, they're thinking about Tahoe, and again, to position ourselves against that competitive destinations that are out there. It was our second year of continued TV in the Bay Area. The TV spot will run right now. So we'll get back to it. This is the gadget spot that ran in the Bay Area.
Dear Gadgets, you know I love you, but we're going to have to spend some time apart. Because winter is upon us.
So that was a 30-second spot. There was also a 15-second spot that ran in conjunction with that. And then the second spot.
The resolution was to scheme more, to make first chair for once, or last chair, or both. Now that's our favorite. Because winter is upon us.
So that specific spot was around our boot camp strategy, which we went into the Bay Area marketplace and really engaged the gyms and the workout locations in order to get ready for the upcoming ski season. So there's a big social campaign behind that. So that one specifically ran in some of the gym opportunities and a little bit on the network side. Some of the networks we did run in were ESPN, FX, AMX, TBS, Comcast, Discovery, National Geographic, and Bravo. We had over 2,000 primetime spots for a negotiated rate of $36,000, working very closely with our agency firm, which is located in San Francisco. And we were able to provide just under 3,000 bonus spots. We also had an Olympic tie-in with the Olympics this last year, and given the fact that Tahoe athletes did so well in a lot of these events, I think the research we showed that Tahoe athletes did better than 63 countries out there. So it was great to have that tie-in. The second avenue that we're going to talk about right now is our out-of-home. The strategy we incorporate in out-of-home is really a saturation strategy within the Bay Area, is to get people in their commutes and in their drive times to see these messages. So we had 18 billboards, 10 posters, and 5 shelters throughout, including the Mooney, the BART, outdoor, and such. 25 million impressions during the length of this campaign. A couple of the creatives you can see there. The big wallboard in the background, those were on major commute areas coming in off Lombardi and into the downtown commercial core area. And then some transit in the certain locations of Mooney, BART, and the ferries as well. Touched on the boot camp. So the boot camp, it was a 6-week campaign again. We conducted 8 boot camps where we went out into the marketplace and got folks from the social environment to join into this and start getting ready for the ski season. Of course, the ski season took a little bit of time to get here, so we had to extend that a little bit, but we kept that message going pretty effectively. In Southern California, the objective was that social conversation and talking to folks as they were making their way to Mammoth. We didn't have the money to really get into LA. LA's most expensive media market in the country besides New York. But the strategy was to talk to those folks either while they were at Mammoth or while they were coming in and out of Mammoth. And then we had a gym program as well. So we had 2 billboards here on Highway 395 and Highway 14, about 1 million impressions there. And then we had 23 gyms in the LA area, again, focusing on those folks that we thought had the most propensity to come up and spend time up here. So about 61,000 spots in that arrangement as well. From a digital perspective, our strategy is an acquisition strategy, get people as they're down that acquisition funnel or that decision funnel, as they're starting to get closer to, well, now I know where I want to go. It's really about impressions. So 8 million impressions in Northern California, with a 0.33 click-through rate, which is about 3 times industry standard. In Southern California, it was 17 million impressions and about a 0.18 click-through rate, which is about 2 times industry standard. This is one of our larger pieces of the budget itself, because this is where people are spending a lot of time as they determine where they're going to go for their travel. Some of the folks that we participated with, in the digital side, Los Angeles Times, we had a pretty good buy with them in the Southern California marketplace. You can see a couple of the different versions of the creative there. And then across the board, that's who we worked with TripAdvisor, Pandora, and Open Snow being our top performers. So as we go through the campaign, we're able to refocus revenue and dollars and budgets into those that are performing. So we do that consistently almost every day, or if not weekly, certainly sometimes on a daily basis. Our social and the strategy on social is really growth and engagement. So the idea is to increase fans and social conversation while maintaining our engagement. You could buy fans, it's real easy to do that, but if your engagement is less than 1% or whatever it might be, you're really not getting anywhere. So this winter we actually increased our fan base by 38,000 followers, yet our engagement, which is what you can see circled there talking about, is still in the 15% range, which is well above industry standard on that. There were a lot of programs in place on the social side. We did a après-ski ebook, that kind of little tongue-in-cheek of how to après-ski. Had some nice input and pickup on that in the press as well. We had a little bit of print, and the strategy on print was really the destination airline hub strategy, working with Southwest Airlines. It's the #1 carrier into the Reno marketplace, which for us is the closest airport. So we had a November insertion, about 3 million impressions on that one. Moving on to search, which is a conversion strategy. Again, it's delivering the eyeballs through our website and into our properties, lodging and booking pages. 13,000 clicks into that lodging page from Northern California, 9,000 clicks from the Southern California. That's really what we're trying to do, is drive that interest, drive that engagement, and get that consumer into the booking engines that our lodging properties are facilitating. And the cool deals section of our website, which has all of the kind of the offers and deals, is our largest part of the website. And if you look at the amount of clicks as a whole that are going to the properties, that's where we see the most amount of outbound clicks. So talking a little bit about the winter, I'll just touch on this. We did provide out of our marketing reserves about $42,000 that were approved by our board of directors to really get into this issue on the snow. And it was really a promotion and perception strategy. Because yes, there hadn't been any natural snowfall to some extent, but there was a lot of man-made snow. Our resorts do a great job in the investments that they have made in the millions of dollars to create that product. We wanted to make sure we were communicating that effectively. So we worked with CBS Outdoor and digital boards. We bought 11 digital boards for about a 4-week period of time, about 20 million impressions total. But what we were able to do, working with our partners such as Squaw, Alpine, Sugar Bowl, and others in the region, they would shoot photography and video in the morning. We would capture a screen grab of that or that photo, and it would be in market by drive time. So we would take whatever was going on that particular day, whether it's just a great shot showing the groomers and the sun and having a good time, and we would play off that message, snow yes, crowds no. Again, just a way to work on that perception, because the California and certainly the Northern California marketplace, they know what the weather patterns are. If it's not raining down there, it's not snowing up here. So we just had to make sure they understood that the snow was coming. It was just coming out of the guns and not out of the sky, so to speak. So we were able to get those messages in. And then once it did start to snow, we still had about a week in our campaign left, which was brilliant timing because we were able to get that message out as well. So at that point, we had 5 feet of new snow in about 5 days, so we were blanketing that message too. We also had radio on this campaign, and again, able to update the spots as conditions change. So we updated these spots about every 2 or 3 days as well. So to end, just a couple things on upcoming events, and I know Sandy just touched on this as well. We do have the Ironman second year, and thank you very much for your guys' support in that, and also for your support in your aid station, which I understand you're doing that again, so thank you again. They did announce on Monday that they are adding a 70.3. The Tahoe race is definitely the hardest race on the Ironman circuit. That has impacted some of the registrations. It didn't sell out in the 18 hours that it did last year. So one of the strategies, and they did this in Asia and in Australia, being Ironman, that they added a 70 on the same day as a full. The thinking is you have the same infrastructure in place. There's no additional cost on that. There's no additional impacts on the community because you're running a smaller race within a bigger race. So the idea is that we think we can get up to about 35 athletes. And from our perspective, they're filling the hotel rooms, they're filling the businesses, and they're filling the restaurants. USA Cycling will be coming in June of 2015. It's a 2-year contract. It's a U.S. Amateur and Para National Championships. It'll be a 2-year contract. It's about 1,200 athletes and about 3,500 of their support crew coming in. And then this fall, we're going to be hosting a Cal Travel Board Summit meeting in October, and we'll make sure we get some information out to you because I want to invite you guys to that reception. It'll be all of the industry folks from tourism in California, so it's an important one to showcase our region. And then also, just as a point, our winter performance measurement report, we're working on that right now. That's the October through March actual written report, and the board, you'll have that by mid-May for your review as well. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Any questions of the board?
Andy, thank you, and Sandy, thank you. Good presentation. I may have just missed hearing you say this, but on the Destometrics slides, was that for the Western region, or was that for Tahoe specifically? Just Tahoe? And how many lodging properties does that look at?
That looks at 14 to 16 properties that have remained the same, pretty static over the years. It is most all of our larger properties, so it does include quite a few pillows and beds.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the percentage of our total overall capacity, it's a significant portion of that.
So Squaw, North Star, but also lodging properties on the lake itself?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great. Any further questions or comments from the board? Okay, any further questions or comments from the public? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Great. We will now move on to our 10:15 timed items A, B, and C, and we'll start with item A, Community Development Resource Agency, contract with Ascent Environmental, Inc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael Johnson with the Community Development Resource Agency. As was discussed at yesterday's workshop, staff is preparing to commence the preparation of environmental document for the Tahoe Community Plan update that is currently underway. Staff has looked at a variety of options and has concluded that it is appropriate to prepare an environmental impact report. In March of this year, staff sent out requests for scopes of work to 3 different environmental consultants who are on the county's lists. 2 proposals were submitted to the county, and staff has concluded that the proposal submitted by Ascent Environmental is the best alternative for the board to consider. Ascent has a strong understanding of recent issues up here in the Tahoe Basin, and they have successfully completed a myriad of environmental documents. Since the selection of Ascent, staff has considered the option of addressing catalyst sites and opportunity projects here in the basin. And this was discussed briefly at the board hearing yesterday. It's important to note that there aren't specific projects that are being looked at. Instead, staff saw this as an opportunity to look at various sites, whether it's in the Kings Beach Town Center or the Tahoe City Town Center, and do a broad range of environmental review, identify what impacts could result if a hotel were to be built, if a restaurant were to be built, if offices were to be built, so that, as Mr. Euler discussed yesterday, it could provide incentive for some future property owner to come forward and be expedited through the environmental review process. From staff's perspective, this is a nominal cost associated with the environmental document, and it will help facilitate future development here in the basin area. And staff believes it shows this board's commitment to ongoing development opportunities in the basin. Funding for the environmental document for the balance of this fiscal year will $61,000 will come from the county executive office, and next year the balance of the money, $318,500, will come from the Community Development Planning Services Fund. Staff recommends that your board approve the contract as presented in your packet. Staff is available to respond to any questions you may have.
Questions by any board members?
Michael, thank you. I wanted to make sure that I'm very clear on this. So yesterday, Greg Lean had raised this issue about his concerns with these pipeline projects that happened in other areas, not here in Placer County, that talked about apparently very specific projects. And what we're calling these catalyst projects are more sort of what-if scenarios for if a hotel came to a certain town area rather than a specific site or a specific project.
That is correct. At this point in time, there are no specific development proposals that have been submitted for county review.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions by board members. At this time, we'll take any questions by members of the audience. And seeing none, bring it back to the board for action.
Move approval of the item.
Oh, didn't
Motion
realize we'd had the
Holmes,
full presentation.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize we'd had the full presentation. Thank you. To the point.
Michael, was there anything else that you had?
No, there's the parts B and C, but for part A,
Oh, I was just taking part A because that was all I was handed the gavel for. So I'm just going to go ahead and get part A over and done with and hand the gavel back to the chairman. So on part A, we do have a motion, Holmes, and a second by Montgomery. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Kratz can talk to Chairman Durant. How's that, sir?
Mr. Chairman Euler. Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Peter Kratz here with the Department of Public Works on the timed item number 4B. This item relates to the community plan updates we spoke of yesterday. The proposal to study parking in the basin portion of Placer County largely comes from public response during the community plan update process. And through that process, what planning and public works developed was a parking strategy scope that addresses program level analysis and project level analysis. On the program level, our parking standards will be reviewed, previous reports and studies will be reviewed, and an in-depth examination of parking inventory along with parking accumulation counts to be conducted this summer in both the town centers of Kings Beach and Tahoe City. I should say that, parking counts have been conducted, but the latest ones they're over 10 years old. So it is way overdue. And I think, again, with the momentum of the community plan update, it's good timing to really look at parking as something that came strongly from the public during this community plan update process, that parking is short and there's tools that we're not using right now with the ordinances that we have in place. On the project side of the analysis for this proposed effort, it is likely that the program level will drive at a minimum the need for additional parking facilities in Tahoe City, particularly with the recent golf course acquisition where the Grove Street parking lot could be extended to the west behind the downtown business core. What the contract we're proposing today, we'll come forward hopefully with preliminary drawings. There will still be a big funding shortfall if we want to build something there, but we will be diligent like we do on other capital projects to pursue funding to make that happen. With the ongoing community plan update effort, this parking study is definitely a timely thing to do. And with respect to securing consultant services for the study, Public Works and Planning negotiated a scope directly with LSC Transportation Consultants, Inc. out of Lake Forest based on their expertise and experience with traffic engineering and parking examination efforts in the region. In order to perform the proposed work, no environmental review is necessary. With respect to the cost, $85,000 is our forecasted budget to support the consultant services agreement and potential future amendments totaling $74,250, and then another approximately $10,000 to support Public Works staff with regard to administering the effort. The work will be funded by a combination of County Executive Office and transient occupancy tax proceeds. The work will include up to 6 public meetings to make sure feedback can be incorporated into the overall effort. With this background information, I respectfully ask your board to approve of the 2 items before you for awarding the consultant services agreement as stated in your board memo, and stand before you with any questions that you might have.
Any
Thanks.
questions of the board or comments? Any questions of the audience? All right, please come up.
Good morning, Ellie Waller, Tahoe Vista resident. How will you take in consideration the construction zone in Kings Beach? Will the traffic consultant figure out a way to look at past parking and not how you're going to deal with it the next 2 years? Thank you.
It's a really good question. I would say, I'm going to defer to our consultant on that. Our consultant has done a lot of parking studies in Kings Beach. I know he'll look to the past on what's gone on there. There will have to be some a little bit of data collection, but a little bit of forecasting there, knowing that we're in the heat of construction. I think a big part of this effort is to see what's available out there, what's going to still be built. So it's a little bit of a moving target compared to what's happening in Tahoe City where we don't have active construction. So I think, don't have all the answers on that today. Gordon with LSC, we've talked about that a little bit, about how we get there. And I think with the first meeting that we'll have with the public, we'll provide more details at that time. But I think there's a way we can get there with a kind of an accurate examination of what are the strategies out there besides just looking at parking facilities that might be needed in Kings Beach.
Okay. Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, staff, ladies and gentlemen. For the record, Steve DeShera, my company is Sustainable Community Advocates, and I wanted to thank Peter for putting this study together, presenting it to you today. We support that. Also wanted to thank Peter. Yesterday he mentioned the On Our Way grant that the county has secured from TMPO TRPA, and I assisted in putting together some of the pieces of that, and there was good coordination, so we knew that what the county was proposing to you in this study, and then what we could do to build on that in the subsequent grant. So just wanted to say thanks to Peter and the team here at the county for helping to coordinate that. So we'll be able to do these things in a way that builds the database and builds what we're able to provide in future to you for your consideration. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Steve.
Good morning, Ann Nichols, resident in Kings Beach. So, with the state recreation area, 40% of the parking's been taken by the construction. So that's going to be gone. So everyone's going to be parking in the grid. And then most of the other places where people have been parking, like the old Kentucky Fried Chicken and stuff, those are all taken with construction vehicles. So it's just going to be it is right now, chaos. I don't see how you can do any sort of study.
It's a valid question, and I would just say that we know what the inventory is out there. If you took all that construction away, a big part of this effort is looking at what is the existing parking inventory with construction not there, what will it be in the future, what are the forecasted land uses into the future, of course dovetailing in with the community plan update of what land uses will be come forward from the updated community plan. So again, it's it may not sound like, it's not necessarily reality, but we've got a good idea of what's out there. The parking counts will still be valuable to know the number of people that are still going to come there regardless.
Well, we're worried about, of course, in, like Speedboat Beach, is that people won't be able to park at the state beach, so then they're gonna go to Speedboat Beach. It's just gonna be chaos for us. So we're really worried about all this and how this is gonna play out, because it's gonna be for 2 years. So
Thank you. Any further comment from the audience on this particular topic? Great. I'll go ahead and bring this back to the board. Resolution and authorization of the Director of Public Works to approve and sign future amendments.
Move approval item 4B, 1 and 2.
Second.
Great. We have a motion, a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to our item C. Jennifer Merchant, County Executive, Tahoe Basin Economic Development Investment Incentives.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Duran, members of the board, Jennifer Merchant. And for the final item, tearing off of the information provided in yesterday's workshop, before you for consideration today are 3 action items intended to facilitate the county's ability to generate development incentives needed to implement the Tahoe Basin Community Plan in the priority town centers. The 3 recommended actions are to affirm that Placer County is committed to facilitating development in Tahoe Regional Planning Agency designated town centers, and that catalyst and opportunity sites designated on Attachment A within those town centers, which is right up here on the map, at least the first one, I could scroll through it, for the Kings Beach, represent the highest priority for near-term investment and impact. Secondly, to approve a general fund expenditure for professional services to prepare a Tahoe Basin Town Center investment strategy and business plan in an amount not to exceed $75,000, which is a budgeted net county cost. And third, to authorize the county executive officer or his designee to initiate discussions to identify commercial properties that could potentially be acquired for the purpose of securing land use commodities necessary to incentivize economic development in the Tahoe Basin town centers. For action item 1, as you see on the screen here, the priority catalyst and opportunity sites are in the Tahoe City and Kings Beach town centers are located. I would like to point out specifically on this Tahoe City map, and you do have it in the attachment in your documents there, that if you look at sites 1, 2, and 3, the Henriksen site, the golf course site, oh, excuse me, not 3, it's 4, 1, 2, and 4, the Commons Beach site, there is a real nexus and opportunity for those sites to work together. Currently, the golf course is owned by the Tahoe City PUD. The Commons Beach is owned by Placer County, managed by the Tahoe City PUD, and site number 1, the Henriksen site, is in escrow right now, and as was cited yesterday, is a real dilapidated retail site that is in great need of probably demolition and reconstruction. So just for some background information on these requested actions, several economic studies, as well as the policy framework prepared for the community plan, indicate that proactive county involvement in creating a suite of development incentives will spur desired economic and environmental redevelopment, yielding a return on investment in tax revenue growth and long-term community and environmental health. The economic analysis and market report prepared for the community plan specifically states that organizational and financing options for strategies to facilitate catalyst investment at opportunity sites in the Tahoe City and Kings Beach town centers should be developed as the highest priority in economic development efforts. The policy affirmation is requested because it is important to current and future investors that the county signal that it intends to take a proactive role in incentivizing environmental redevelopment in the Tahoe Basin's town centers. As an example, action taken by your board today would complement action taken last week by the Tahoe City Public Utility District related to the Tahoe City Golf Course efforts in the Kings Beach Town Center as well. As you recall, your board in 2012 granted $2.75 million to the Tahoe City PUD to purchase the Tahoe City Golf Course for various economic development, recreation, and environmental protection purposes, and also entered into a memorandum of understanding for the management of the site. The Tahoe City PUD Board approved policy last week to negotiate for the use of transfer of development rights off of the Tahoe City Golf Course in order to facilitate redevelopment of the Tahoe City commercial core while also preserving the property's recreation and environmental improvement potential. The action was supported by unanimous vote of the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association Board. This is an excellent example of partnership opportunities that can be further explored with other agencies to achieve common economic development goals in both the Tahoe City and Kings Beach town centers. For action item number 2, the proposed business plan would analyze a variety of incentive options and financing tools, assess return on investment back to the county, and also make a recommendation on lodging and mixed-use capacities for each town center so that commodity acquisition targets can be set within TRPA's prescribed development envelope. It will also consider acquisition, banking, and distribution options and criteria, including potential partnerships with other agencies and nonprofit organizations. Once the business plan analysis is complete, Placer County, if Placer County were to act to create a tourist accommodation unit banking and distribution system, as recommended in the Economic and Market Analysis Report, it could serve to stabilize the volatile and difficult to access tourist accommodation unit market, as well as serve as part of a suite of incentives that could include other development rights and commodities, shared parking agreements, and fee programs that would also facilitate integration of other commercial space, like retail and office, as part of a diversification strategy for investors. Finally, because of the market's volatility and the importance of the ability to act quickly, today's staff recommendation also includes authorization to initiate property acquisition discussions as the business plan and investment strategy are underway. Any recommendation would, of course, be brought back to your board for consideration prior to any action. The business plan is expected to be completed within 60 days. Again, because we are aware of the urgency of the current economic development opportunities in both Kings Beach and Tahoe City town centers. So with that, I would recommend that your board approve the 3 actions stated, and I'm happy to answer any questions about those actions.
Any questions or comments on the board?
Jack, I had a couple of quick questions. Jennifer, thank you. I really want to make sure I understand. I see a faint blue line on that slide.
The one on the upper right-hand corner?
No, it actually sort of goes around the whole.
That's the town center boundary.
But my understanding is the golf course is not within the town center.
That is the proposed town center boundary as currently recommended by the community plan team.
Okay, great. I just
Sorry.
needed to get a clarification on that, because I just looked at that and went, I'm pretty sure the golf course isn't within the town
No, it is
center.
currently not within the town center, and that, of course, is not an action that's been decided yet. There would be pros and cons to including it in the town
Yeah.
center, but that is recommended currently by the Tahoe City Plan Team.
Okay, because I just thought it might raise a few concerns if people thought that that was actually the current configuration. And then I also just wanted to really make sure that what I heard on Catalyst Site, I don't really like that term, but Catalyst Site 2, is that is actually, the vision for that area is actually to take development rights out of that parcel and redirect them to the Highway 28 more traditional town center.
Well, I wouldn't say that there is a clear vision for the site yet. There has not been a master plan accomplished, but what the action the Tahoe City PUD Board took Friday certainly opens the door for that to occur, because it does set forth a policy by which development rights could be transferred off of the golf course and utilized for economic development purposes within the existing town center or along the commercial core strip. So that would allow the golf course to be retained for recreation purposes and environmental restoration, open space purposes, and not further large-scale development.
Okay, and currently, is the area identified as 6, the riverfront improvements, is that, I don't remember, I'm so sorry, is that within the existing town center boundaries?
Yes, that is within the existing town center boundaries.
Okay, so it's 64 acres in the golf course that aren't within the existing?
Correct.
Okay.
And like I said earlier, neither one of those have been decided yet, but there are certainly recommendations on the table from the plan team.
Right, understood. I just didn't want people to make assumptions that because of that very faint blue line, that the golf course particularly was already included within that. Do you have the Kings Beach?
Yeah, I do. Let me
map
grab the
as
clicker.
well?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
It's been moving back and forth. so-
Yeah, it's peripatetic.
There you go.
Okay. I wanted to take a look at this because I wanted to make clear to people that yesterday I misspoke when I said that the county had control over sites 1, 3, 4, and 5. And I just wanted to make very clear so everyone understands that the county does not have control over those, but the successor agency does.
That's correct.
And I just wanted to clarify
Thank you for making that clarification.
Thank you, yes, you're welcome. That was it for me for now.
Okay, any further discussion by the board? Any further discussion by the public? Please state your name and your address, sir, or where you live. That's fine.
Sure, Samir Tuma, Kilo Properties. I reside in Palo Alto, California. Wanted to take a few minutes and address a couple of issues that were talked about yesterday as well as today in the context of this item. I think it's pretty clear to everybody that the timely completion of a community plan is critical to the success of bringing environmental as well as economic revitalization to the basin. And I think yesterday, Supervisor Euler in particular talked about the uncertainty of result in time and the real barriers that exist today, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the lack of an approved community plan that's consistent with the RPU exacerbates the uncertainty and the risk. The recommendations that staff has put together, looking particularly at the plan for the area plan, the catalyst sites, and the commodities, I think all go towards rationalizing the current situation that exists in the basin. And so I think they've done a great job of that, and I would commend staff for the work that's been done there. I would say that with respect to the timeline on the plan, the documents themselves say that that timeline is aggressive. And so in thinking about how quickly you can get the project done, I think establishing milestones and tracking to those milestones is extremely important. Economic conditions are favorable as we sit here today. That won't last forever. And so I think time is of the essence in order to take advantage of the new framework. In terms of the catalyst sites or catalyst projects or whatever people want to call them, I think nomenclature perhaps is getting in the way a little bit, but as Supervisor Montgomery pointed out yesterday, these sites, this idea, the concept has been being talked about for years in Tahoe. It's in all the economic studies, and these sites should really come as no surprise to anybody that that's what's being looked at in the context of this plan. And I do think looking at them at a programmatic level within the context of the EIR, EIS makes a tremendous amount of sense. Not only for the reasons that have been talked about in terms of evaluating what's there, but I think it's also beneficial to the public because the public begins to understand what a real project could look like. It kind of gets a little bit out of planning speak and a little bit more into what could we actually put here, what would it look like, how would it impact our community, and so that's real important, I think. When it comes to commodities, I think the concept of the commodities when they were put into place was really a great idea. Essentially a cap on development for what really is the jewel of the Sierra. However, the problem is today that system is broken. And I think what's happened, the byproduct is that it's made the market completely irrational. And I think the proposals that staff has put together in terms of coming up with a way to level the playing field and put the basin on the same level that surrounding communities you have to compete with makes an awful lot of sense. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, again, for the record, Steve Bashir, Sustainable Community Advocates. There's an additional economic study that's just out in final draft form. I know county staff's aware of it, and that's the Highway 89 Fanny Bridge Community Revitalization Project Economic Analysis, which again builds the same case and is further evidence of why the package of recommendations that staff has brought to you today is the right one. So it's a progressive package, it's a timely package, and we're confident this board will support it, and thank your staff for putting it together for your consideration today.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Ann Nichols again, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. I've really been trying to think about why things haven't been working really at North Lake Tahoe, why that $70 million in redevelopment money, we really don't have a lot to show for it. $1.5 billion in the lake for clarity and the near shore. Looks terrible. So what's going wrong? And what I'm thinking is, and this is just my opinion, but for instance, the economic analysis that is touted as being so good, it assumes that we lost this population because of the existing lodging. We're lacking large resort development. That's not the reason we lost that population. Casino revenue is down 40%. They've let go of 6,000 employees on the South Shore. If large resort development was the answer, South Shore would be fine, and they're not, because they already have large resort development, which they did a number of years ago. So why are we looking at the economic analysis result conclusion with the wrong assumption, and now the wrong conclusion is that we need more large resort development. We need boutique resort, we need lodging, it's terrible, but we need boutique projects that aren't really large, 120 units or less. And we need to get, instead of all this advice from agencies, and they work really hard, the county, we need, and stakeholders that are government people or paid employees. We need people from the successful entrepreneurs from the local economy to sit on boards to go, you know, you guys are paying too much for BBLLC. Get some real input from people that are on the ground. They know what the customers are saying. I think if you really got that going, there would be less agency, you know, government input and more on the ground. And hopefully we wouldn't further squander more money. And that's what I'd be looking for with my taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Wyatt Ogilvy, Kings Beach resident, and I have a small business in Tahoe City. I first wanted to commend staff on doing a really thorough job of putting together a roadmap to completion of the area plan process. I've wanted to see that for a long time, and it's great to see that we have a succinct schedule, and now with your award of the contract to Ascent, we've got a path to get there. A little bit about the schedule in terms of from, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about the schedule and staff showing getting, late summer, early next fall, maybe the TRPA concurrence. So if we call that, I don't know, it's less than 16 months from today. From the private side, for a project, these projects of significance we're talking about, that's a really good schedule. That's a really fast schedule. I mean, the minimum time for a project of significance to create new lodging is a 21 to 24 month period to go through a joint environmental document, best case. So with that, as we talk about encouraging investment, I think, you know, one of the that time frame is the perfect world. That entitlement process and the risk of that process is one of the greatest challenges to someone looking at making an investment in our communities, to put forth a lodging project or something of economic and environmental impact positive to our community. So to Supervisor Montgomery's comments yesterday, all these sites, I mean, they've been talked about in these communities for as long as I've been here, and I think preceding that. So they're not new sites, they're not new projects. With the award of the contract to Ascent, the one thing that I would encourage you, you have an opportunity before you, I think, with this approach of how we utilize your environmental consultant, Ascent, and staff in the process to try to reduce that burden once the plan's done. That to reduce that 21 to 24 month period to entitlement and then construction, to encourage that investment and get to where we see the investment quickly following the adoption of the community plans or the area plans. So I think that this concept of looking at things programmatically, and I would just encourage that we have enough direction that programmatic evaluation really has meaning and strength so that we can come out of the completion of this process into seeing those investments and those improvements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ellie Waller, Tahoe Vista resident. In the packet, it says discussion of requested actions. I would like to request that staff have a workshop type format so we can discuss the proposed code changes for TAUs. Also, as an example, it says Placer County could purchase a blighted hotel, bank the units, and have CTC purchase the property from the county to fund demolition and restore the site. I'd also like, as part of that, I think to quell some of the fears, is have the MOU partners from the golf course also attend that meeting. I attended the golf course meeting. There was lots of public comment. I think it was a really good forum, so people better understand what this Catalyst program, and this is really truly just building off the old CEP special programs that were in the 1987 regional plan. Calling it something different doesn't mean it's changing the site locations, and I would also encourage that you, with that workshop, make it a 2 to 3 hour presentation. I know it's hard for people to sit through, but the devil's always in the details, and that's where a lot of people find that it's more acceptable to look at things if you have the details. Thank you.
Great. Peter, Jennifer, did you want to comment on that or at all?
I think regarding the TAU code changes, those would be made through the area plan or community plan update process, so that there would certainly be public opportunity to discuss what would be proposed.
Okay. Sir?
Good morning, gentlemen. My name's Alex Morolatis. I own the Morolatis Lakeshore Resort in Tahoe Vista. I had a couple quick comments. I think I also would endorse what staff has put in front of you today, and I think it's a bold set of recommendations that have been a long time coming. I wanted to make a comment regarding the Catalyst project rationale and the whole historical focus we've had on project-oriented solutions, and focus maybe or direct or suggest a focus be more on the process of entitlement and maintaining finger on the pulse of how effective these mechanisms are at attracting investment and producing results in the economy. So if I look at those bubbles as an example, what we define as waterfront improvements under 2, we had a nice discussion the other day at the quarterly meeting with the NTBA about, and I think staff is very flexible in the way they define these, is those are general circles that could encompass things like potential motel conversions inside the grid of Kings Beach that has now become a beautiful cottage, beachfront, walkable, livable community. So things have changed, and incentives need to be monitored over time, not just against catalyst projects, but against what they should produce, which is demand for additional investment within those commercial cores. And one suggestion is whether it's part of or a prerequisite to the investment strategy effort, I think there needs to be an effort to define the baseline inventory of the commodities that we do have in these communities. In particular, in the area of TAUs, I firmly believe, as an owner of active as well as latent TAUs, that the county does not have an accurate, or none of us have an accurate view of what truly exists out there. And in order to determine what the future should look like, one must have a good understanding of what inventory we're dealing with. And that latent definition is TAUs that have been banked on properties, on deeds that I don't know who knows about, but they are valuable assets that, one last comment, and the task force that I sit on with the TRPA and the Prosperity Plan and counties, we looked at this market-based commodities exchange is extremely valuable at multiple levels, not just at the project level I'm referring to, but the opportunity for us to achieve environmental and economic goals here in Placer County must go hand in hand with working with South Shore and determining what our priorities on these commodities and how can we exchange and help achieve goals mutually within the basin. Final point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any further community discussion?
Good morning, Sandy Evans Hall, CEO of the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association. And I also want to commend staff for bringing this forward. Our number one goal within our board of directors is really to enhance the built environment at the lake shore through redevelopment, environmental redevelopment. And I'm pleased to see that we're aligned with the county in their goals of economic development, because I think this is so important right now, especially as our economy is starting to improve, that we take action and be proactive on this issue. To create a level playing field for investors in our area, we're going to have to take a different stance on commodities. And I've been working with the Tahoe Prosperity Center on this commodity issue. And I think there are going to be coming forth to the TRPA governing board some action items that they might be able to look at. Everything from conversion from one commodity to another, the ability to transfer between jurisdictions, maintaining a basin-wide approach, looking at commodities banking. So I think all of those things are things that we need to participate in. As the regional plan addresses environmental redevelopment, it is saying that in order for us to get the maximum improvement for our environmental thresholds, we're going to have to incentivize private development to do so. So I'm very, very pleased. I think Placer County is the first out of the gate in really bringing this forward for a county-wide process, and I think it's the right thing to do and the right time to do it.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the public on this matter? Great. Then I will go ahead and bring the item back. We're being asked to take 3 actions, affirm that Placer County is committed to facilitating the TRP agency designated town centers, catalysts, and the opportunity sites designated in attachment A for those town centers that represent the highest priority for near-term investment and impact. Approve a general fund expenditure for professional services to prepare a Tahoe Basin Town Center investment strategy and business plan at an amount not to exceed $75,000, a budgeted net county cost, and then authorize the county executive officer or his designee to initiate discussions to identify commercial properties that could potentially be acquired for the purpose of securing land use commodities necessary to incentivize economic development in the Tahoe Basin Town Centers.
And Chairman Duran, I had a couple of
okay.
clarifications that I hope, just based on some of the public comment. I think Alex's comment about making sure that we define our baseline commodities, both active and latent, that is, I think, part of your proposal already.
That would be part of the capacity analysis. We know that TRPA has stated that they think there are about 1,300 TAUs in Placer County. We can't add up to that number, so it would be incumbent upon us to figure out what is existing in the communities. We know there are about 400 in use between Tahoe City and Kings Beach as hotel, motel units, but we need to know what we have before we figure out what the need is.
And
so that's definitely part of that business plan analysis.
That's great, and I think that actually gets to Ellie's issues and concerns that she raised, which is, more detail about, really what do we have and what are we proposing here. And I wanted to make sure, I think what I heard that you say is that there will be a public process that will allow the public to weigh in and discuss it more fully.
On the specific changes to the area plan, so, and it kind of gets back to what Alex and Sandy were talking about, the Tahoe Prosperity Center changes are similar to what is going to be analyzed in the environmental document for our Placer County Tahoe Basin area plan, and that is this conversion concept. So there would certainly be a public process surrounding that. I don't think that we'd be having a public process about acquisition of additional tourist accommodation units.
No, and I don't think that that's what was being proposed.
Okay.
I think what was being proposed was more of an educational outreach to say, here's some of our ideas, and here's what we've identified. Here's what we've identified as potential future needs. Similar to, I think, the discussion that was had on the golf course regarding the golf course last week. So not where are we going to go acquire these and how are we going to convert them, but this is what we've identified as we have active, this is what we've identified as latent, this is what we've identified as potential future needs.
I think we could certainly make that information available to the public in one format or another, whether it's a presentation about the business plan or something like that. Yeah, we can absolutely
Okay, great.
include that.
And the NITRAC is always a,
Yeah,
you
that
know,
might be a great
opportunity.
venue for that.
Absolutely. And then getting to Ann's points about boutique projects, I really wanted to key off on that because what Ann said is exactly what we have been discussing.
Yeah.
I don't think, you know, I don't want to speak for Samir, but my understanding is, you know, the vision that he has of a potential project moving forward on a site that's been identified for decades as needing redevelopment is 120 or less. So it really does fit that boutique category. The KB Town Center would be a mixed-use project that would have a fairly small, probably 120 or fewer, I believe, lodging capacity. So they fall exactly into the vision that Ann was proposing for boutique hotels, rather than, you know, no one's proposing large resort development, you know, on any of these sites that we've identified either specifically or more generally. And in fact, most of them couldn't even possibly take that sort of level of development. So,
That's correct. In fact, when I wrote down in my notes here, large resort development is not the answer, and I think that we would probably all agree on that.
Yeah.
That's not what we would be proposing, and we could never even accommodate large resort development, given the coverage, height, and density constraints. I think that 120 number is probably within the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And then really the capacity question is, how many of those kind of facilities would the communities support when you look at the mix of lodging and commercial and other commercial retail business uses?
absolutely. Excellent. Okay, thank you. I just, you know, I think there were some really valid points and concerns that people raised, and I wanted to make sure that we circled back and touched on them before moving on with anything. Those are all my questions,
Okay.
comments.
Any further comments from the board? Great, then I'll go ahead and bring this item back.
Move approval of the action items.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Very much. Great. I will now move on to item number 6, Community Development Resource Agency Planning Services Division, Placer Vineyards Owners Group, proposed draft fiscal impact analysis. Michael Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With me this morning is Michelle Kingsbury, and this morning staff is presenting reports seeking policy direction on the fiscal impact analysis for the Placer Vineyards project. As the board is aware, the Placer Vineyards project was approved back in 2007. As approved by the board, the development includes up to 14,132 residential units and an array of commercial and office uses. The project was designed to potentially develop as a full-service, standalone, incorporated city, and that potential still does exist. Since the original approval, the owners group for Placer Vineyards has been meeting with county staff to make adjustments to the project to make the project more viable in today's economy. On December 10th of last year, your board provided policy direction to staff on specific aspects of the owners group proposed draft finance plan, and staff is now seeking policy direction on assumptions to be used in the preparation of a fiscal analysis for the project. The purpose of the fiscal analysis is to compare project revenues, such as property tax and sales tax, compared to the cost of providing services to the project. The original fiscal impact analysis for this project was prepared back in 2006, and that study was updated in March of 2013. The owners group did not concur with all of the assumptions that were used in that report, and staff concluded it was appropriate to conduct a third-party review, a peer review of that study to see what other assumptions might be used. The county retained the services of economic and planning systems to perform the peer review. EPS has done numerous economic and fiscal impact studies for the county. One of the concerns that is consistently raised by the development community is that the assumptions used in the county model are different from the assumptions used by other agencies throughout the region. And so in its analysis, EPS not only looked at the county's current assumptions, but also the assumptions used by other agencies in the region. It's important to note that the peer review was not intended to run the fiscal impact analysis, but rather to identify what assumptions should be used in the running of that analysis. And that's the direction we're seeking from your board this morning. If the board does direct staff to modify the assumptions, staff will go back and work with the Placer Vineyard Owners Group to incorporate any direction you provide so that a fiscal impact analysis can be prepared for the project. As noted throughout your board report, the potential for long-term implications, both to Placer Vineyards and other projects, does exist, and staff has tried to identify each of those implications in the staff report for your consideration. At this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Michelle Kingsbury, who will go over the specific recommendations that were identified in the EPS report.
Before we jump into that quickly, Mr. Chairman, and Michael, you just alluded to it with your last comment. Your prior comment had said that if the board acts to adopt these assumptions, that you'll be going back to work with the Placer Vineyards Group, but I know we have other projects. We're talking about an active Placer Ranch project. We, of course, has the adopted university project. So my assumption would be that, sorry, bad use of word, that these assumptions then would be carried on for the analysis of those projects as well.
That is correct. Staff has had discussions with the owners of Riola Vineyard, Regional University, Bickford Ranch. They have all been talking to county staff, and it would be staff's thought that any direction provided by your board would be used in the update of any fiscal impact analyses prepared for those projects.
Okay, thank you.
There were six. Let me know if you hear. There were 6 primary areas in which the owners group disagreed with the county assumptions and proposed other assumptions that were more industry-wide or common within fiscal modeling. And we'll go through each one of those in a little bit more detail. The first one is what they call in the report employee weighting factors. Essentially, this is to recognize that an employee doesn't necessarily have the same demand for service that a resident would. It's almost like a discount factor that you could think of. The county's current model uses 2 different employee weighting factors. For general county functions, the weighting factor is 0.24. So essentially, that's an employee equates to a 0.24 person per se. For public safety category, the weighting factor is a 0.31. The owners group has proposed consistently throughout their memorandum, and as we detailed in the report, to have a more common-based industry-wide weighting factor of a 0.50. And so what EPS's charge is to look through and really look at what everybody else does in the region. They examine Roseville, County of Sacramento, Cordova Hills project, I think the rail yards project in Sacramento, and it's commonly used within the industry of a 0.50 factor. So within EPS's peer review, they did recommend that the county consider changing the weighting factor to a 0.50 to be more consistent. The second area in which EPS performed their peer review was in something called efficiency factors. And what this one does is recognize that not necessarily do costs grow in a linear fashion, that you may recognize economies of scale. You can certainly recognize some diseconomies of scale, but that costs could be, if it costs $1 today, it might cost 75 cents tomorrow with this added base of development ahead of you. You won't necessarily have to hire new department heads. You won't expand your board membership. So what these efficiency factors do is try and recognize that there's certain fixed costs that won't necessarily change or change in a linear fashion. Within the body of your report, the owners group requested certain efficiency factors be applied, particularly within, I think, the administrative, legislative budget categories, et cetera. And what EPS did is took a look at what the owners group desired and what they thought were supportable types of efficiency factors in each of the budget categories that they felt could be supported. Included in attachment 3 of your report is a more detailed kind of line item budget category list of what EPS's recommendations are. And if you so desire, we can go through them, but for ease of this presentation, we thought to just reference back to that attachment. It does include a very detailed list of each budget line item that they would recommend some efficiencies for. However, they generally concluded that overall that efficiencies could probably be supported with this development, the type of population and percentage increase in population that could be warranted for those types of efficiencies. And also looking at, with West Placer growth, that you may realize some economies of scale as well by having more growth down there. You could recognize some diseconomies, certainly, But they wanted to just point that out as well, that, rather than have Placer Vineyards as one isolated development down there, you definitely can see more efficiencies if there's more development that occurs down there. The next area, the third area in which the owners group requested some changes was something within the budget that's called fiscal impact adjustments. And this was more of, I think, an anomaly. The original model that was updated in March by our county fiscal consultants was the 2011-2012 year, where the county utilized reserve funds. And so these line items for things such as workers' compensation insurance, I think the countywide automation project that were funded from reserves, which otherwise would normally probably be adjusted within the department budgets. And so it was highlighted in this fiscal model. The owners group requested that this be removed from the analysis. However, when EPS did their review, they felt that it was more of the anomaly of the Great Recession that was occurring at that was why these adjustments were there, and felt it was warranted, as the county did, to keep those adjustments in play in this fiscal model. The one area EPS did point out is there was debt service funded by debt service reserves. It's an area where certainly to look at that you're not double dipping or having duplicate costs if you're also charging the owners group through their development with the capital facility fee, and this debt service does cover debt service on I think the South Placer portion of the South Placer Jail, FAB, et cetera, that otherwise are things covered within the capital facility fee plan. So they recommended an examination of that to determine whether or not those costs are duplicate. Keep going. I think our fourth area is functions with negative net county costs, which basically means there's surpluses that arise in these budget categories for things such as environmental health, there's treasurer, tax collector, et cetera. The owners group wanted full credit for all surpluses that were existing within the budget model, or the model. What EPS did is, through their review, they concurred with how the county approaches surpluses in these budget categories. So for instance, in certain categories where there's multiple line items, multiple groupings in a budget category, but the end result, you get credit for the surplus that might be in that general category line item. But the end result, if it's a surplus, would be then zeroed out. Or functions like road fund, where there tend to be some carryover and surpluses. The county zeroes those out. The ownership doesn't get the benefit, but they certainly don't get penalized for those types of ways that the county accounts for cost. And so what EPS did is they concurred with the rationale that the county used in dealing with all the functions with surpluses. Our fifth area is it's what we call allocation of costs to countywide and unincorporated. And the area in disagreement that the owners group had is really in relation to the allocation of countywide general government costs that are in categories such as administrative and legislative, et cetera. And really what the county does is they take these general government costs and they apportion them across both countywide and unincorporated at a ratio of 68% and 32% respectively. The owners group requested a more common industry standard where those functions or costs that are incorporated go in the incorporated column, but otherwise all other general government costs, rather than apportion them out in this ratio of 68 to 32, just put them in the countywide costs column and not do the ratios spread. And EPS, through their peer review, actually concurred with the owners group recommendation and recommended to do that approach. They indicated in their analysis that it's very common. It's in the industry is that is how those costs are dealt with, and that jurisdictions don't necessarily break those general countywide costs out into both countywide and unincorporated. And they recommended a more simple industry standard version and what the owners group asked for. Lastly, the sixth area and final area that the owners group did have disagreement with the county model was in the calculation of sales tax revenue. The county typically uses a demand-side approach to looking at how they can justify what type of sales tax revenue can be attributed toward a project. The owners group looked at more so a supply-side approach to things. They were projecting a certain amount of square footage and utilizing a sales tax revenue per square foot basis to get full credit for that type of development. EPS concurred with, through their peer review, concurred with the county's approach to utilizing a demand side, looking at, first of all, how much demand is generated through the project, both from a resident perspective and an employee perspective. They took it a step further, however, and where they really started to diverge from the county model is looking at what we call that outside capture, or how much of that retail demand is not captured within the project, where you really have to start looking at commuter traffic, pulling in sales tax revenue from residents that may be outside the project area, et cetera. They added in more credit toward the regional university. I think the county's original model gave credit towards student spending. The EPS, through their peer review, added in additional spending from both the university spending perspective and visitors to the university spending perspective. They added in additional sales tax revenue toward the project for recognizing, I'll flip to this slide, the location of the project. And if you look on this map, the magenta toward the bottom of your screen is Placer Vineyards. It's located along a major commuter corridor, and it's actually located along the going home side of the commuter corridor, which has a great value when you look at retail development. Their largest power centers are going to be located or proposed to be located along Watt and Baseline. So you just have, when you're coming home, you can think of, I'd rather turn into my Walmart or power center on the way home. It's an easy right in, right out. So they gave a lot more credit toward the location of the project. They also gave credit toward underserved types of developments, your Dry Creek, your North Sacramento, and the ability for, because of the location of this project, to pull back some of that spending power that, for instance, Dry Creek would otherwise go to the city of Roseville, and allowing them to capture more. The ultimate result was that EPS credited the project with about $5.8 million in sales tax revenue through their analysis. What EPS also did, and I'll go through these quickly, is this is beyond what the owners group requested, but EPS provided some additional recommendations based upon their familiarity with the county model. The first area in which they provided some additional recommendations was in how the funds are how the budget shows the general fund contribution toward public safety. And they recommended, rather than a line item, to actually show where those dollars go. Do they go to DA? Do they go to the JAG? Et cetera. Break it down to a little bit more detail to show where the funds are consumed. The second item they had was eliminate the reversing out process of allocations or charges to and from departments, and leave those charges in the departments that consume those costs to better reflect where the costs are derived from, versus reversing them out and putting them back to the originating department. The third area they provided some additional recommendations was to provide some clarity between the county and urban service costs, and maybe create a template that summarizes these costs in a more simple fashion. It is important to note that the March 2013 update to the county model really just focused on countywide costs. The urban service case studies were pending, and so ultimately this type of template may have been created. It just wasn't at that time because the costs were pending. The fifth area that they provided some additional recommendations was in terms of existing liabilities, such as your other post-employment, OPED. We'll go with OPED.
Benefits, yeah, OPED.
It's an evolving, in discussions with EPS and their peer review, these costs that are existing throughout the jurisdictions in California. It's an evolving conversation with each jurisdiction of how those costs are treated and how they're attributed toward new development, and whether or not they're a burden that should be shared or not with new development. It varies by jurisdiction. It's something they wanted to point out for your board consideration or direction on, do you want to maintain consistent policy of how you're dealing with those now, or look at more changing that toward new development. But it's certainly a conversation that's evolving day to day with every jurisdiction, and as development is ramping up again. The last area that they provided some additional recommendations was how property taxes are calculated. Our current model is conservative in how they do calculate the property tax revenue attributable toward projects, and over time it actually shows reflects the assessed value that decreases over time. It reverts back to 2012 dollars, and as you increase the property base pursuant to a 2% general increase, you reduce back for inflation, and you can realize a negative value over time. What EPS recommended was keeping things more so in constant dollars, where your growth in property tax value keeps pace with inflation. You don't have a negative decrease over time. And they said it's pretty common within the industry, and they recommended consideration of changing the way those property tax revenues are calculated. While it is a quick presentation, those are basically the 12 areas in which EPS, through their study that was attached in your report and certainly provides greater detail, recommended the board's consideration for some changes to the fiscal model.
As the economy moves forward, we are starting to see development projects come back. As Mr. Euler spoke to earlier, staff is currently having discussions with Regional University, Bickford Ranch, Riola Vineyard, and each of those development projects has expressed similar concerns with the county's fiscal model. While the county's model has been very conservative, the question that we're trying to seek from the board today and presented in your report is, are there modifications to assumptions that can be made that will allow the county to be competitive with other projects that are coming forward, not only in Placer County, but throughout the greater region? And what the development community is looking for is consistency. So whether you're in a Roseville project, a Sac County project, there will be some similarity in the assumptions that are used. It's important to note that General Plan Policy 4B3 requires that new developments pay for their full cost of impacts to services that are provided. And nothing that is being proposed today will modify that requirement. Developments will be required to pay their fair share of their impacts to county services. If the board directs staff to move forward, staff will work with the Placer Vineyards Owners Group to prepare a fiscal impact analysis based upon the assumptions that you identify. Staff is recommending that the board take action to accept the primary recommendations from EPS, accept the additional recommendations contained within the EPS peer review, and then direct staff to move forward and incorporate those assumptions in a fiscal impact analysis for the Placer Vineyards project. That concludes staff's presentation. Staff is available to respond to any questions the board may have.
Any board questions or comments? Yes, Supervisor Wygant.
So, Michael, is the goal here today to consider actually changing the fiscal assumption policies, or run the numbers and look at the differences in terms of the absolute values and how they would look over time, and have that be considered by the board at a later date? I guess that's the question.
As presented in this staff report, the recommendation is to modify the assumptions that are currently being used to be more consistent with other assumptions that are being used for other jurisdictions in the area. So it would be to modify the current assumptions that the county uses.
Further question?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question regarding the existing liabilities, the retirement, accrued retirement, and OPEB benefit payments. My understanding, our current process is everybody helps pay for that. So why would we want to change that with new growth? I don't understand why new growth would not be helping pay that down. I don't know if you can answer that question, but it's a concern I have.
Concern warranted. I think the question is more so to pose the question of what other jurisdictions in the area are doing. The conversation, as I mentioned before, is certainly evolving jurisdiction by jurisdiction. It's really up to your board to consider it now or at a later date whether or not you do want to change that or keep the policy the same.
Okay, well, I'd recommend keeping the policy that we have.
Any further discussion? Supervisor Euler?
Nothing right now.
Okay. Just a comment before I open it up, and I just want to kind of explain my thought process here, and for the benefit of the folks that are watching this and kind of wondering what's going on. We have a fiscal model that we use and that we've put together and we've built over time to assess what fees and costs are with related developments. We also have a policy that we implement, and development pays their way. So in this particular case, we have a developer that came to us and wanted to take a look at our model based on what other folks have done in other counties and cities and other jurisdictions. So what we did is we talked as much as we could between each other, the county and the developer, and then at some point in time, we basically hired or selected a third party to take a look at the bigger, broader picture of what we do, what other folks do, and make recommendations to possibly look at our model in a different light. Would that be a correct
That is
statement?
correct.
Okay. So, and I'm sure that the developer folks that, when they come up and talk, will probably hit this point, but I think what I see happening here is, number one, we're looking for folks to make an investment in the county, right? And we want, from a business perspective, and I'm a business person, and I think what we want is we want to know that what we're looking at is comparable, I think, in the broadest context to what other folks do in the model. To have some certainty in order to make that investment, in order to understand what is going to be expected of me when I come to this jurisdiction and put down my money to build a development, build a medical center or whatever. That's kind of how I'm looking at that. And there is some risk that's involved, correct?
Yes.
There is some risk. And one of the things that I just wanted to point out and ask you a question about is there's a comment here on your, I believe it's on the background. There it is. It's on item 2, fixed variable costs, efficiency factors, and you explained how the efficiency factor was 1-to-1 and then it was reduced to 0.75. I get that. On page 9, right at the bottom of the second to last paragraph, the last line says, it is important to note that the fiscal impact analysis did not account for future operational costs to the new South Placer jail facility. How does that factor into what we're doing here in looking at those costs in the future? How do we account for that?
Go ahead.
I think I'm not the fiscal staff on the CEO side, so I certainly won't proclaim to be the expert at that, but as new development brings forward, based upon the budget, for instance, the update was looked at on the 2011-2012 budget and how those numbers were ran, and when those costs are recognized in those different budget years and when the analysis are done, you capture those costs. I'd certainly defer to fiscal staff for a more in-depth conversation about that. I'm not the expert on it.
Sure.
Won't claim, but I think it's that point in time when you look at things.
So we've got a couple of acts remaining
Absolutely.
moving forward. Okay, that answers my question. Before we move on, I just wanted to thank everybody that's been working on this particular project. I know we've been in discussions and going back and forth for, 18 months now? And we've all had a lot of input. I know CEO's office has had input. I know Cedra has had input. I know the developer, who I hope is going to come up and say some things, has had input. And I think what we've got here is a very interesting, reasonable way to move forward in light of the financial crisis and the recovery. And with that, I'll open it up to public comment. Yes.
I actually had a few clarifying
Yes,
questions
okay.
before you did. Sorry, a couple things you brought up raised some issues in my mind. So on page 5, I think it is, of our staff report, I think it's page 59 in the hand-numbered numbers. One of the things that caught my eye in this is the relative property tax share. And I think it's important to note that the document says that the average county general fund property tax share throughout unincorporated Placer County is about 29% and ranges from 22% in Lincoln to 29% in Rockland. I know there are actually areas up here in the east end of the county that are even higher than that, into the mid-30s, in fact. the comparison, I believe, is about 13% with this change. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
After ERAF shifts.
After EREF shifts. And so my question is we do have a policy that says you've got to pay your fair share. What happens if in the future we discover that this really isn't paying its fair share? I mean, how do I explain that to a constituent who's paying 33%, that, you know, these folks in West Plaza are getting the same services for 13% that somebody in Eastern Plaza is paying 33% for?
It's an excellent question. I'm not sure I know how to answer it right now. I think these are projections, you know, whether they're realized or not, and that's why these models tend to be conservative in nature, is because they are projections, and they're projections out, you know, 30-plus years of having these revenues realized. You tend to adjust services based on revenues collected. You know, I wished I had a better, more succinct answer for you. It's a good question.
I mean, I guess my gut worry is there a mechanism to go back and say, sorry, we thought it was going to be appropriate, but now you guys need to pay more? Because what I really don't want to see happen is us say, gosh, it's really not enough, but we don't want to reduce your level of service, so we're going to kind of a little bit reduce everybody's regardless of what they're paying.
I think it's also important to recognize that this talks about the countywide but not urban services. Those were done, police, emergency services, transit, were done on case studies. So we're not, those types of services they've agreed to pay for what the basis of those case studies were. So we're not talking about that side of it. It's a great question. You know, I don't know how to answer it, to be honest with you.
And I mean, Michael, maybe you know, is there a particular mechanism that could address this in the future if it turned out to not be a sufficient amount of funding?
There is a mechanism to go back and to make modifications. I do believe it would be subject to a Prop 218 procedure, but there are mechanisms where you can go back in and make modifications. But because of Prop 218, I believe it would be more difficult than it may have been in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Michael, is that the same difficulty? I know that when we did some tax share agreements in the past, we actually did with property, I believe it was sales tax. We had a low mark and we had a high mark, and we had timelines at which we would kind of relook at the deal, if you will, moving forward, and that if there was a shortfall, there was some type of a mechanism to review that. And without going into the Prop 18, is that the type of mechanism that you're talking about?
It would be similar to that, where we would go back in and consistent with the general plan policy, being sure that the project was paying for the cost associated with providing services to the project.
Right. Supervisor Euler.
Yeah, as we're having this conversation about the base property tax rate in the eastern part of the county or other parts of the county, it's important to understand what we're talking about here and the two different revenue streams. The reason we're having this conversation about the ongoing services costs is in recognition of the fact that the basic property tax any longer doesn't meet the cost associated with the development. And so that's what we're here actually discussing today, is what is reasonable to assume the cost of providing service to the new growth is going to be above and beyond. We're talking about encumbering these projects with costs, with fees that nobody else in the county pays. I mean, none of the development that happened in Granite Bay happened with the exception of some stuff in Tree Lake that did have some CSA stuff associated with it. But the vast majority of the unincorporated growth in the county just happened with homes getting built and property taxes getting paid. And we don't have these special service areas that have these fees that are charged on an ongoing annualized basis with adjustments. And so that's precisely why we're having this conversation. It's not a question of will new development pay more than just what the county is going to collect in property tax. It's how much more. And to the point that Supervisor Wygant raised about, you know, the evaluating one versus the other by looking at the numbers, you know, we can run a model that shows what the revenue would be to the county under our assumptions versus under the revised assumptions. The fact of the matter is the market has told us we're not going to see projects under our assumptions. And we missed in Placer County, we missed in the unincorporated area most of the greatest building boom that we've seen in the region and in the lifetime of many people that have been in this business for a while. So The fact that we have projects that didn't move forward in that time, I think is illustrative to the fact that we just, as a county, are out of balance with the rest of the area from a price standpoint. And the one area that did move forward, the Morgan Creek area, we've unfortunately seen, the highest number of foreclosures in that area because we did have service costs associated with that project that were just unfortunately not sustainable. And people were able to move in and afford to move in, but they weren't able to afford to keep their properties once they moved in. And so that's the issue that we're trying to address is how do we make sure that we are looking at these numbers, number one, with the county's budget priority that has always been in place, and that is to ensure that development does pay its own way. Since '94, it's been our priority. And number two, though, in such a fashion that we actually are cognizant of the economic drivers that will either stimulate the growth that we've authorized or will continue to stagnate what has been sitting idle since 1994.
Jack?
Robert?
So as we go forward, particularly, I'd be interested in hearing comments, reactions to things like, so good points, Kirk. But I guess what I'm going to be focusing on is my interpretation. A lot of discussion when the general plan was updated about new development paying its own way, and what does that mean? To me, what it means, and I think what our fiscal goal has always been, is that we minimally be able to retain our existing levels of service, that new development will not push down those existing levels of service for police and fire and road maintenance and everything else we want. But also, when we enjoyed extraordinary prosperity, that our levels of service might actually see that opportunity also and be able to do extra things like the monies that we used to contribute to our open space fund that resulted in Hidden Falls Park, which is hugely popular with our residents. It was a bonus, if you will, but because we were healthy financially, we could do it. So I want some feedback. I know problem with this issue is we get one bite of this apple. We're talking now about can we do these modifications, and if you got DAs in place and all kinds of other mechanisms, I think it would be pretty tough to change things. And so I don't know the model. I haven't dug through all the analysis and data and details and how it works. But when I hear things like, it's always been my understanding that our assumption, in fact, was and is that as a result of Prop 13, property taxes are not going to keep pace with inflation. And unless there are some dramatic changes historically in the inflation rate, I don't see that changing. And the realities of funding OPEB are the reality that we somehow have to fund OPEB. So, I'm open, but I have some concerns, and I guess I'm not. If in fact we're going to be approving new development that runs the risk of diminishing our existing levels of service, that's a threshold for me that is problematic.
At this time, I'll go ahead and open it up to the public to make their comments.
Chair and members of the board, my name is Al Johnson, and I represent the Placer Vineyards Owners Group. I want to thank you very much for having this item on the agenda and allowing your staff to work with us on addressing these issues related to the fiscal model. Over the years that I've been involved in both the public and the private side, I have gone through many times looking at fiscal models that affect very large projects throughout South Placer. The way these models work is they took a look at your average costs applied to your budget and project those costs forward. In many cases, new development provides, we're oftentimes focused on the cost of new development, but not too much focused on the pluses that they bring to the county. Like, for example, a brand new area the size of Placer Vineyards, a brand new residential development will not drain on the county's health and welfare costs upon the average cost that you would see across the county. It brings a substantial benefit to the county's budget in the sense that they do pay the average cost. And over time, as the project ages, it will, of course, begin to become more typical of what you would see of county development. But in the early stages of the project, it is a great revenue stream to the county. Supervisor Holmes brought up a very good question about the fact that you have in the past health and you have health obligations to retirees that you have a debt for. And so how does new projects deal with that? One of the issues we raised was that, hey, that is a past obligation, not a new obligation. But in our meetings with the county, we worked through that, and we found that typically all agencies they distribute that debt across all projects, and we agreed to do the same thing in this fiscal model. In these models, there are built-in conservative estimates to provide as much security to the county as you can, that as you approve these projects, they are actually pay for their costs as they go forward and help support the rest of the county. And Supervisor Wygant brought up the assumption of property tax increases. In these models, they're very conservative about how property tax grows, and then match it to the costs that are increased, so it's a net zero. Whenever property tax begins to accumulate faster, that's a plus to the county. So when you do these models, you look first at cost, then you step back and take a look at what your property tax revenues are. This is a low property tax area. We also take a look at what the sales tax revenues that are generated by this project. This project has a considerable amount of regional retail in it, 1.5, 1.6 million square feet. It generates a significant amount of revenue annually to the county in sales tax revenue that helps pay for the cost. But based on the model, when the model's run, if there's a shortfall, then the annual assessments on these residents are plugged in to make sure that gap is covered. And that model that we're doing right now, the assumptions that you approve to run this model will tell us what that gap is that every resident will need to pay to make sure that the project pays 100% of its costs. Now in this process, I know my time's up, so I'm going to
No, you can keep going.
quick. Is that we raised some issues. The county, we worked with county staff. They brought in EPS to do a peer review. All the issues that we raised, the county did not agree with us. The peer review did not agree with us. But we worked through all of those issues. And at this point, based on the analysis done and the idea of working together and making sure we have a conservative model, the owners group is in full support of the recommendation that's before you from your staff and the peer review. We have agreed that this is a reasonable outcome of this review and would encourage the board to take action to approve it. If you have any questions, we have some folks here that would help on the details of these studies, but would be happy to address them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions from the board for the owners group? Okay. Any further questions from the public? Okay, I'll go ahead and bring it back for the board for more discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and jump in here. I am as concerned as any member of this board with the ongoing financial viability of this county. I have, in the 12 years now, I guess, that I've been a county supervisor, I've made that my number one priority. Primarily focusing on cost drivers, but of course also speaking to the point of maximizing our revenues wherever possible, even to the extent of encouraging public participation in investment in infrastructure in order to promote private investment. Right now, what we are hearing from the business community and is being supported by our staff is that unreasonable assumptions, assumptions that assume cost drivers beyond what has historically been real, are the single greatest impediment to large sector private investment in our county. And whether we're talking about the vineyards right now, the university in the future, or the Sunset Industrial area, we have to have assumptions that are, yes, conservative, but realistic in the marketplace. And the only way that those assumptions and their viability will be borne out is by the private investment community's willingness to embrace them, as demonstrated by moving projects forward. And over the last 2 decades, we have seen the incorporated cities of Placer County absorb fairly significant growth. Roseville, certainly no worse for the wear. Rockland, certainly no worse for the wear. Lincoln, yeah, we've got some issues in Lincoln, but Lincoln made the same mistake, unfortunately, of saddling their future homeowners with service costs that were simply unsustainable. And so I believe it continues to be our obligation as supervisors to make sure that we continue to keep the county fiscally viable by addressing those service cost drivers, as this board has shown a willingness to do, but at the same time, taking those steps that we can to encourage private investment in this county through necessary infrastructure, through future sales tax opportunities, by embracing what the business community is telling us, what the consultants are telling us, and in fact, what our own planning staff is telling us, and that is, we've taken the time to look at this, and we think that we can safely make modifications to the assumptions that we use in moving forward. So I'd encourage my colleagues to embrace this opportunity.
Another question, David and maybe some other folks, maybe Holly's perspective. Kirk, I don't, I think, I don't disagree with you. I think what I'm looking for is the ability to sort of monitor performance as we go forward, recognizing that actually we would have a tough time making some adjustments. But to me, there are sort of two responsibilities that we have here that can make sure that over the long run, keeping in mind that making a decision in a moment in time to last into perpetuity is pretty ludicrous in the first place, and it puts a tough burden on us, but puts a tough burden on everybody, actually. But could we monitor fiscally how we were doing with these changes and how they have an impact on our average cost of services over time going forward? Because there are two, to the extent that we would have methods by which we could maybe remedy that in the future, it'd be one option. But two, we're also going to have an impact on the fiscal outcome, all of this, by the quality of the projects that we approve. Mm-hmm. We could easily probably do a lot to devastate the fiscal condition of the county 50, 75 years hence by approving projects that are going to deteriorate in terms of their value rapidly. Fortunately, in Placer County, in all of our agencies have tended not to do that. And I think it's one of the things that distinguishes us from other places, including some neighboring counties. So we have some options, some hooks, if you will. But I guess I'm asking staff if we would have an ability and could we fund and get some feedback and some data that gives us some information on how this model changes that revenue stream and what impact that revenue stream has on our ability to fund our average, if today's the benchmark, cost of services, and at least give us some sense of that going forward. So David and/or somebody.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Actually, one of the things that I think this process has really informed us of is the level of sensitivity that these models have, because they are only as good as the assumptions and the predictions of the future bear. So just like we've tried to get more sophisticated in our ability to do multi-year financial forecasting to inform our budgeting, I think it'll be important for us to see how these assumptions play out as we begin to process projects using them, and to really look to staff to do that kind of sensitivity analysis that you're speaking to. Some of these changes are more significant than others, right, but they all are based on a certain forecast of the future, and I couldn't honestly say how any one of these projects is going to build out 10, 20, 30 years into the future. So I think we do need to have some sort of a monitoring mechanism in place. Moreover, I think that just on the sales tax assumption as an example, I think it's going to be incumbent on us to really look at what is the the total marketplace for retail development in Southwest Placer, and at what point will it become saturated to the point where either it's going to drive older retailers out of business, replaced by newer, or how that's all going to kind of sort itself out, because it's not an insatiable demand for retail space. You know, at some point we reach a limit, and then either existing businesses will fail, or new projects won't get built upon which we're assuming certain revenue streams. So again, another example of how I think we really do need to put into effect a monitoring mechanism that gives us that continuous feedback so that we know what the results of our assumptions really are.
Well, so I guess, you know, where I am is, you know, if my colleagues are supportive of that kind of an effort, I don't know exactly what it looks like. I'd like to see it actually connected to our budgeting processes annually. You know, I'm willing to give it a go, if you will, but with a willingness that we might be putting ourselves in a position of hearing some bad news, and then we have to deal with that.
Well,
and we have to be responsible.
Point, if I may, Robert, to that point, I agree with you, and I think it would not only be prudent but necessary for us to evaluate these assumptions on a go-forward basis and see, as projects begin to build out, were we correct in these assumptions? I mean, my point is that the assumptions that we as a county have been operating under for decades now, actually decades, the market has told us those don't work. And so we're now at the point, okay, are we willing to try something new? Absolutely, let's monitor. We all know that it's not like we're going to have absorption of all of our available projects within the next 5 years before we can throttle back and adjust things, right? I mean, we'll start to see this project build out. Hopefully we start to see the university project get in and start to build out. And so we will have, before Curry Creek comes in and before the other projects to the north and all the rest come in, we will absolutely have the time to be reviewing that to say, okay, we assumed it was going to be this. Where is it coming? Because we're just not going to see that kind of rapid absorption that will lock these assumptions into place in the form of development agreements that have already been executed and fee structures that have already been put into place before other projects have come on through the pipeline. So I think not only do I agree that it's prudent, I think it's absolutely essential that as we move forward, we monitor the impact of these assumptions and see if, in fact, we are maintaining our pledge that we established back in '94 of development. Not just paying its own way, but as you rightly pointed out, not diminishing levels of service provided to others.
And quite frankly, just to add to your conversation, I mean, that would be a criteria for me moving forward, that we don't go through this with blinders on, that we actually have, that we're really close to the project, we're really close to the numbers, so we know and have that data to make further assessments as to what the success, or to retweak it, if you will, down the road. So,
and it just to one, we took a step in that direction. Of course, with my favorite community, Lincoln, where it's easy to take that one bite of the apple and be very conservative and know that we've positioned ourselves as best as we can financially, knowing that 100 years from now, who knows what the landscape's going to look like or what else the state is next going to take from us. But in fact, so the reason I was receptive to the agreement that we crafted with Lincoln, or a key reason why I was receptive, is it puts us in a partnership with them. And it gives us a chance to make us all stronger in that regard. But critical to it is making sure we have good information and that we have the courage to daylight all of that.
so if I go back to and read the tea leaves here, Kirk, was that a motion that you were?
I'm prepared to make a
Okay.
motion that the
got some
board,
comments.
that the board accept staff's requested items 1 through 3, but then also modify that to direct staff to develop a fulfillment model, if you will, that actually gets reported back to the board on an annual basis as we are doing our budgeting, where we begin to look at the effect of these assumptions that the board has adopted, how it has actually translated into our ability to meet our levels of service. And then we might even go further, and that is to direct that every 5 years or so, the board be in a position to reaffirm the assumptions, so that we just continue to move forward and evaluate this stuff as we move forward, so that the assumptions adopted today are on some kind of a sunset. Maybe 5 years isn't far enough out, but maybe a 10-year sunset that a future board has to come back and reevaluate. And of course, any future board next month could say, we want to change that. But I think it's important that we put future boards on notice that we made this decision. We hope it spurs the economic activity that will result in the kind of revenue that we think that it will. But you future boards are going to be expected to be paying attention to this. So I'm going to modify the three staff, or accept the three staff recommendations, but add the additional recommendation that we begin incorporating an analysis of our projected revenues versus actual receipts for new development as part of our annual budgeting basis. I'll leave off the sunset part at this point.
Okay. Before we move on, Supervisor Montgomery.
Yeah, so I've heard a number of good suggestions today. I particularly like the idea of some kind of monitoring mechanism, but I think it's in some respects putting the cart in front of the horse a little bit, because the concern that I have, which is not a concern with any of the specific proposals, I don't want to pick them apart sort of individually one by one. My concern is that, we're basically being asked to make a policy decision today without any real substantive analysis of both mid and long-range fiscal impacts that include looking at Riolo, Bickford, University, Curry Creek, Placer Ranch, all of that. And it's very easy to say we're going to come back in 5 years and evaluate it and change everything. It's very difficult to actually do that when you have a developer in front of you who says, hey, how come you did it for X project but not mine? It becomes, it becomes a very difficult task, frankly, for this board or a future board to say, yeah, we're going to change it. Sorry, we did X for this group, but we're going to do Y for you now. And so I guess I would be willing to support this at a future date if we could really specify what is that monitoring mechanism, what specifically is that sunset, and what are the metrics for looking at it and saying, yes, it's working, or no, it's not working. And really, frankly, I am uncomfortable without understanding, having a better understanding of the long-term fiscal impacts cumulatively for all these projects if we don't make the change. So while I do actually feel like I could support this moving forward, I can't support it today because I don't think there is enough specific data and clear enough process moving forward to address concerns if they do come up. That's it.
Okay, any further, Supervisor Holmes? Okay, so we have a motion.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. All right. We will move forward with our last item, our last public item, item number 8, County Executive, Middle Fork Project Update. Mr. Heath and Mr. Story.
And Mr. Tibbs as well. Who's going to join us today? I think it's still good morning, Honorable Chair and Supervisors, or did we pass that mark? So it's afternoon. Sorry about that. Brett Story, representing the CEO's office. I'll be assisted today by our energy consultant, Dr. Dean Tibbs, and by our Deputy CEO, Andy Heath. As you recall, 2006, a JPA was formed for the Middle Fork project, where two of your board members, Supervisors Holmes and Supervisors Wygant, sit on that JPA. So they get quarterly information, and last time we were before you, We told you we're going to bring back an annual information period. This is it for 2013. We'll be here today. Obviously, we're always available to answer any questions. Today, we're going to be providing you that 2000 year in review, plus a look at what's happening in 2014. We'll also be giving you an update of the Finance Authority project for this year, what's going on. And then finally, we will update you on our Placer County Middle Fork project net revenue distribution policy progress as of the date. So Dean, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tibbs to talk about this last year.
Good afternoon. I'd like first to talk through the results of 2013 in terms of operations and marketing and revenues. So on the front of operations, I'm pleased to say that I think we've had a very smooth transition into our new position as partner in the Middle Fork project. We took over May 1st, 2013. PCWA took over scheduling of power into the market. PCWA continued operating the MFP. There were only minor operational issues through this process, and all of these things were identified and discussed between PG&E and PCWA so that they were resolved sufficiently and smoothly, we think. We believe. Invoicing and payments from PG&E, we had timely invoicing and we had timely payments from PG&E, so that went very smooth, and there were no disputes either with PG&E on the revenue side or with the independent system operator, where tons and tons of data are generated to produce monthly invoices. So all that went as planned. We had no disputes, no need for resolutions, so very good. On the marketing and revenue side, as everyone knows by now, our hydrology has been the big issue. It was a below normal hydro year, and it was barely that. It was almost a dry hydro year. So we started off our ownership term, or our partnership term, with a tough case of revenues coming toward us. We not only had a below hydro year in 2013, we also had the beginning of another below hydro year for 2014. The hydro year starts in October, and as you know, October, November, and December were extremely dry. We had virtually no rainfall, no snow at all, so it wasn't shaping up to be a full recovery for us in the next year either. I'll come back to that. On the prices side, we also had below expected prices, and this happened especially in the summertime when our electricity prices generally get higher. So between the hydro operations and the price impact, we had kind of lower than expected revenues. And that's seen on the table that we have next, where we've divided, and this is an annual operations results table, so we have sources and uses of revenues. You'll see the first column is the 2013 budget that we expected, and the second column is what we actually did. I want to make one point about the 2013 budget, and that is that when we start our budgeting process, it starts in November, and in November we know virtually nothing about what hydrology will be. But in July, we take another look at what hydrology actually turned out to be, and we readjust our budget. So what you're seeing here is the 2013 adjusted budget. So this already compensates for what we know is going to come in the term of below hydrology. Even then, you can see that we had a $38 million forecast source, and we had only $32 million of realized sources come in. So that's probably the price effect, if you will. That's our below normal prices that came through. On the uses, we take a look at our expenditures, our capital projects, our additional working cash, and our reserve funding. Our expenditure side, we have the MFPFA MFPFA administration costs. These include interest expense, which was capitalized. So those were washed out with our draws on the bond, if you will. And then we have we have power division, which is PCWA's cost of running the project. We expected to spend $18 million on that, $18.5 million. We only spent $15.1 million. So we tightened the belts a bit. PCWA tightened the belts a bit and generated a little bit of savings there. On capital projects, we were expecting 8.6. We spent only $7.9 million. So we saved a little bit of expenditure there. We also needed to bolster working cash, so we put about $2 million into that, and that resulted in a reserve funding. We were expecting $9 million, and we were able to put in $7 million. So that's the sources and the uses of our funds for the project for the year. Summarizing that, our total MFP gross revenue was lower than forecast by about 19%. Our expenditures were lower than forecast by 22%, so that the funds available for capital expenditures and reserves were lower than forecast by 10%. So we had less money coming in, but we spent less than we were expecting to. As a result, we had a lower, but still underachieving, if you will, funds available. The bottom line to all this was that there was about $7 million contributed toward reserve funding. Now, reserve funding is an important thing because these reserves have to be met by MFPFA policy. We took a lot of time thinking through how we wanted to set up the reserves and what level we wanted to set them up as. The three reserves that we set up are operating reserves, emergency reserves, and capital reserves. The operating reserve, partially funded, all $7 million went into our operating reserve for 2013. We had a target of $25 million, which means we still have a shortfall of $18 million. This will need to be made up over the next few years as we generate more revenues and more availability to fund that. The emergency reserve wasn't scheduled for funding in 2013. When it is funded, it'll have a target of $2 million. Now, the emergency reserve is part of our overall risk management program at PCWA and at the MFPFA, so it's a piece of things. $2 million doesn't seem like a lot of money for something as big as the Middle Fork project, but we have a lot of insurance and we have other instruments in place that allow us to define that level, that target level. The capital reserve, the capital project appropriations capital project appropriations were funded to meet our needs this year, in 2013 last year. So that went smoothly. We weren't able to fund any of our capital reserve target. The target is $24.1 million. That too will have to take place over the next few operating years.
And just as a side note, Supervisors, that capital reserve is based on projects that we would be required to do by FERC license, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
So, where are we? Did I skip that page?
Nope. Observations on the reserves.
Okay, so the observations, the reserves have to be funded before we can distribute any net revenues. So we're looking at probably 3-4 years out before any net revenues will even be available for distribution to the parties, to ourselves, to PCWA, and to prepay the 2006 bond. Reserve contributions were lower than expected due to lower hydro year and lower prices. So that explains that. Capital expenditure plan was met for 2013 through direct appropriations. We didn't run it through the capital reserves the way we will be running it once we get those reserves funded. And 2014 is likely to be the same way. We aren't going to have capital reserves to draw on, so we're going to have to appropriate it for that year also. And finally, there were no calls on operating reserves. So that's the good news. We established some operating reserves and we didn't need to call on them. 2014, we have 2014 is the volatility, what I like to describe as volatility in action. We always talk about how unpredictable the weather is. 2014 hydro year looks like it's going to be dry, which translated means it's going to be worse than last year. So 2013 started us off on a tough step. 2014 is going to be even tougher with the hydrology. The expected prices in the power market don't look like they're going to fully recover. We see some reasons why they might get sort of back up a little bit beyond where they were last year, but it's still going to be kind of a weak power market in terms of prices as it looks right now. The impact of that then is that the performance we saw for the 2013 is going to look somewhat similar for 2014. We're going to have, we're going to meet our capital needs, for instance, but funding the capital reserves isn't going to go a great deal further. We will contribute probably to additional operating reserves, though. And then I think that's it.
Yeah, we'll stop here if you have any questions of this part of the.
So just to clarify, there was an expectation, I think, and this is when I started on the board, that there would be, some money to dole out in 2015 after we paid for all of the capital expenses, and replacement reserve and all those things that we had to do to upgrade the system. So now what you're saying is that we're looking at another 3 years out because of the circumstances of the drought.
Similar to your last project, our modeling showed if we took an 80% of average, we would have been at that point.
Right.
But reality set, we had
Right.
2 very
Okay.
dry years. But
Okay,
yes,
thank
it's
you.
the same principle. Okay, next we'll shift gears a little bit and I'll provide you a quick update of what's going on with the Finance Authority project this year. On the relicensing project, the CEQA and NEPA analysis was all completed in 2012. We're currently waiting for the State Water Board approval. Initially, it looked like they were going to get to it this year. They completed a couple of projects that were ahead of us, but with the drought declaration by the governor, virtually everyone in the state water is working on the drought and are still working on it. So last time we asked, it's going to be delayed within the next 1 to 2 years, we hope. 1 to 3 years, we hope we will get this. But luckily, it doesn't affect us in too great a detail. We get an annual license agreement with the former conditions that we've been doing for 50 years. Each year until a new license is issued. That has less restrictive flow requirements on us, so in a way with the dry hydro years, it actually helps us balance those issues out. We're still, the river is still in good shape environmentally, and we're still able to meet all of our water demand, all of PCWLs will meet their water demands with all this and still do some of the recreation. We're continuing to work with those agencies, the Forest Service and others from the federal and state government to get ready for that implementation. We've got a lot of design plans that must go through the federal and state requirements. We have staff from the Middle Fork Authority through PCWA and us supporting them, working to make sure that those are ready to go when we do get our license, because there's actually a few projects that are beneficial to us economically that we'd like to get done very quickly on the project. On the energy side, shifting gears a little bit on the policy, the energy risk management policy for the Middle Fork Authority last year was put in place with a basic protocol because we did not know enough about the market or the conditions. We now know much more, and we are actually moving forward with a much more detailed, and that policy will come to the Middle Fork Finance Authority at the July board meeting. It's one of those policies, though, that will never be complete. It'll be as good as what the market and the conditions exist. In other words, there'll probably be an annual update to that policy each and every year because the market does change. In fact, we've more recently heard of a change that's happening later this year that we're already planning for in this policy, but that's how the Cal ISO and the energy market works. So we'll keep that under control. Some of the bigger projects we're looking at for the future of that, an energy control center development, which will provide, which is essentially the 24/7 operating facility that currently PG&E provides for the Middle Fork Finance Authority. We're looking at a plan to bring that back in-house so that we can take control of our destiny. We believe it'll provide increased value, certainly increased reliability, security, and lower risk management options for the Finance Authority for our project. That study will be done in June or July, and then it'll be brought to the Finance Authority to put into the following year's budget to make sure that that is achievable before we are done with our current PG&E contract. And then switching gears a little bit, we are also moving forward with a strategic business plan development for the near future. And that means essentially what do we do when the first 4-year, 8-month contract with PG&E is up. We want to put ourselves in a position to control our own destiny with either our own scheduling coordinator and control center, or at least the ability to move away from a PG&E type source. In fact, we're getting indications that they might not be desirable of continuing the contract they currently have with us now. So we're trying to put ourselves in a position to control our own destiny on that project. So that will be done before the end of the calendar year this year as well. And just a little bit on the infrastructure, as I mentioned, the staff at PCWA, the engineering staff, is moving forward on a lot of these capital projects from the design side, so that when we do get our FERC license, we can hit the ground running, get these projects done. There is a window that they'll be giving us, and it's all depending on the economic analysis that FERC has looked at. We'll have so many years to complete all of the projects that we agreed to complete in the FERC relicensing, so we're trying to get a jump on that. I'll answer any questions on that part.
Any questions from the board?
Great, thank you. The next item is the net revenue distribution policy progress, and as your board has given us direction, the CEO, staff, and members of the Finance Committee have been working diligently on your behalf to bring forward something that Andy will go in a little more discussion, and Dean will talk a little bit about the analysis. But essentially, your direction, we are able to meet, and the fundamentals of your direction, we're looking at funding of projects that have significant countywide or regional benefits, that their use is consistent with existing plans and your board priorities. They maximize long-term net revenues to the county and leverage other available dollars and programs to be mixed with them. It does not supplant existing dedications for infrastructure or program. It recognizes them and helps support them. Money would be available for projects that reflect costs related to regulatory constraints outside the jurisdiction's control and other funding resources. As you all know, we often get those type of mandates. That we establish and maintain reserves for some income stabilization, and that we identify and estimate the extent to which there is a capacity to pay as you go and fund projects and programs accordingly with that. I'll stop there just to make sure we captured what the board was looking for us to do.
Just really wanted to make sure, if we could go back, thank you, that when we talk about the pay-as-you-go, that what that really means is that we don't presuppose future earnings, but we're really operating with at least a year of actual received revenues. So we're operating after having received revenues.
Yes,
Okay.
and we'll go into that here in a second. And
Okay.
actually, to your second point, Dr. Tibbs is going to discuss next some of the economic modeling analysis that's been done to show why it's important to only use money that you know you have and is audited. We've added to that as well.
Well, I think this year is a clear demonstration of why that's important.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. And with that, we'll move on, and Dr. Tibbs will show you some analysis that's been done.
Yeah, we wanted to take a more thorough look at what might happen under conditions of setting up a annual payment structure. For instance, if we did a financing against MFP funds, or if we just said, we'll dedicate $1 million a year towards things. And to do that, we start with the same picture I almost always include in any of my discussions, which is our sawtooth of reality. We've had good years and we have bad years, and this year was not one of the good years. It was one of the lower years. It's that, if you can see it there, it's that blue line. Next year, it looks like it's going to be even below that blue line. So we're seeing this from the bottom up as we move into this.
We will end up with either the third or fourth driest year on record with 2014. As the snow falls, yes. Thank you, Supervisor Duran.
Little flurry.
We need to get bowls out there captured, I think. Cisterns, excuse me, cisterns.
And this is all flowing the wrong direction, but that's okay.
So to look at this, I used a technique that I've used before for this project, which is to put a model together which looks at revenues that will be generated by the project, its expenses, and then the net revenues that will be available for distribution. It includes funding of reserves and how long that takes, and it has probabilistic attributes to it, to where the model allows for randomness in hydrology, randomness in prices, and randomness in a few other things, such that What it allows us to do is create thousands of scenarios and then put those scenarios together to get kind of averages, if you will, as to what might happen with the project. The specific analysis that I did was to consider two scenarios. One scenario was a $1 million commitment for 20 years, and the second scenario was a very aggressive $5 million commitment for 20 years. And then within those two scenarios, I wanted to see what would happen if we had a reserve stabilization fund, if you will, and if we didn't have a fund. So those are the two scenarios, and then two variances of the scenarios, if you will, that I looked at just to see what might happen if we went down that road. The results that I got is that in both scenarios, when we have no reserves, that is, we just make the commitment and let the money come in as it does, the cases resulted in a high probability of missing payments. Specifically, under the $1 million scenario, there was an 89% chance that we'd miss a payment or two. And it was more than a payment or two. It got up to 9 payments in a 20-year period. It's almost half. For the $5 million scenario, it was obviously more dire. It was 98% probability that we missed some payments. And that's not surprising because $5 million a year is just a lot of money with the volatility that we're seeing. If we establish the high reserve funds, and by high I mean the $5 million reserve fund in the first scenario and the $10 million reserve fund in the second scenario, things got markedly better, but still, they're quite iffy. For the $1 million reserve fund scenario, we still have a 20% chance of missing at least one payment, and under the $5 million scenario, we still have almost a 50% chance of missing at least one payment. So this by itself is a tough source to deal with in terms of trying to establish committed expenditures. Obviously, if we have a commitment and the commitment goes back to the general fund, then we're also exposing the general fund to this volatility and to these circumstances. The conclusions that I come up with is that issuing debt against the county's MFP revenues is going to be at the least very costly. We're going to see high costs in the form of the reserves that we have to set aside. $5 million and $10 million don't do the trick. I didn't go so far as to figure out what it would take to bring that probability down to something, I don't know what reasonable would be, 2%, 1%, but it would be more than $5 million or $10 million of money just sitting in reserve, not being used for other purposes. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is when our lenders look at this, they probably want a little bit more in interest rates. So I think we'd see some high interest rates. And I think also it would be likely to place this kind of an instrument into the marketplace. So potential lenders would look at the untamed volatility supporting this loan or this commitment and probably have a problem with it. So for those reasons, we don't see a ripe opportunity here for middle support project funds as a source by itself of issuing debt.
And we'll pause here for any questions before we conclude.
Okay.
Great. Well, we'll get our cleanup hitter, Andy Heath, here to finish out on the policy process and details. Take it away, Andy.
Thank you. As your board is aware, staff has been working with the Finance Committee and other members to prepare a policy for your board's consideration at some point in time in the very near future with the budget process regarding the use of the receipt and the use of the Middle Fork money as it comes in, the net revenue to the county. One of the things that the policy will be considering, consistent with what's already been presented today, where you have a very high level of volatility associated with the receipt of the funds, is to use these funds for capital and one-time project planning at the board's purview. So the board will have an opportunity, consistent with the policy, to dedicate these funds as recommended towards capital purposes and other one-time projects to the extent, or one-time purposes to the extent that the board desires to do that. Right now, we are working on putting together a capital approach to this year's budget that will be delivered to the board on June 3rd with the proposed budget, where we're taking the projects that exist in both the capital facilities plan and the proposed infrastructure investment plan, and we'll be presenting that information to you in a very comprehensive document that will demonstrate what the proposed and recommended projects are for the next fiscal year, 2014-15, And then furthermore, what some of the projects are on tap for future years, what the funding sources are for the existing, for the current fiscal year, which will be 2014-15, and then more importantly, what funds exist for you to encumber for additional projects at the beginning of the year. So you know exactly what funding sources will exist. It is the intention of this policy to recommend that the Middle Fork net revenues be placed as a funding source into this master capital budget each year as part of the capital process for board consideration with each year's budget. One of the things that will be recommended as part of the budget as well is to establish a trust fund to receive the net revenue. This trust fund will be in the general fund. It'll be set by policy so that all of the distributions that come to the county, the net distributions, will be placed into this trust fund. Each calendar year, which is the hydrology calendar year, the county will be paid in August and November. And then subsequent to the end of the calendar year, the revenues, the net revenues will be trued up in March, consistent with an audit process. So once all the revenues are audited and we know exactly how much revenue, net revenue the county will have received, we will be able to have exactly that amount available to us. This timing is actually good because in March we start kind of putting together the proposed budget. So we'll have known for the prior year, in 2015, take for example, how much money we will have received in March of 2016 for development of the 2016-2017 budget. So those monies will be available to you for any recommended purposes, including capital projects or other one-time costs that pursuant to this policy. We'd also like to establish a reserve fund to protect our annual investments. This reserve fund will be set aside in the trust fund and will be available to cover any unknown costs that might exist with board appropriated projects for cost overruns and the such that may happen, as frequently happen, to the extent that there are additional costs for those projects. This reserve fund can be established at any level consistent with board approval each year. It can be changed, and it can cover pretty much any costs associated with what you think the cost overruns might be for those projects that are allocated for use of the Middle Fork monies. Appropriating the funds, again, will be considered with the county budget process, and it will be included in the county's financial and budget policies. The funds will be considered for capital and other one-time uses, and as Dr. Tibbs mentioned, it's probably not too practical to use these funds for a securing debt where you have a long-term ongoing debt obligation to secure with this source of revenue, primarily due to just the volatility, the significant volatility, especially that we've experienced in 2013 and are likely to experience in 2014. Finally, the timing of the policy. We will be bringing this policy back for your board's consideration as part of the June 3rd proposed budget process. And with that, I think we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions by the board?
Andy, thank you. I just wanted a clarification on the bullet point that the fund should not be used to support debt due to unpredictability over time. That would be the securitized debt that you're talking about, not, for example, say, paying down an existing debt like SMD3, putting $1 million toward paying that down.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, using this as a security for ongoing debt. Yeah.
Thank you.
Our current agreement with PG&E for the purchase of the power goes, you said another 4 years, 8 months, is that right?
No, the total is 4 years and 8 months, so we'll be concluding December 31st, 2017.
Oh, okay. What is their current price per kilowatt hour that they're buying at this point?
The average price that we are receiving,
Okay,
in other words,
yeah.
it's we sell, I'm sorry. We do
I
a
want to know
couple of things.
what they are paying, not what we're receiving after operational costs and all the rest. I want to know what are they actually paying?
It's broken down a couple different ways.
Okay.
Part of the payment that they send to us is an overall $14 million a year in capacity and other green attribute payments. We actually get a monthly. It's broken down by how much per month. The other piece of it is the actual dollars that are received on the energy market. The average kilowatt price we get now is in the...
It's about 45 or so, $45 a megawatt hour.
But we track every single one of them. So what happens is it gets, they take what PCWA tells them to go sell at, and then there's a market reconciliation, and then that's a pass-through through PG&E back to us. They take out 3% for their services of whatever the total costs are of that,
Right.
of just the energy market stuff. The other payments are capacity payments that they make to us. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I mean, given, at some point, I would, because obviously from the consumer standpoint, all this breaks down very simply. You have demand charge and price per kilowatt hour that the consumers pay, especially when you're talking industrial users and all the rest. The demand charge is of course a key component. And this is one of those, you know, maybe it's just so ridiculous as to not even be worth contemplating, but we've talked in the past about the possibility of creating some kind of cogen opportunity at the MRF that we could use to feed into the Sunset Industrial Area. And what I'm wondering, as we look at the Sunset Industrial Area, I have always thought one of our single biggest challenges in the Sunset Industrial Area is the price of retail electricity from PG&E when you've got Roseville right next door at a third to half. And so if we put ourselves in the position of possibly someday actually being a regulated utility by the CPUC as an end-use retailer to the Sunset Industrial Area, the combination of us essentially buying our own hydropower for resale in the Sunset Industrial Area. Of course, you're paying a transmission charge to PG&E to get that power down there. But with a combination of that hydropower that we would have coming out of our own system and any kind of biomass opportunities or cogen opportunities we'd have at the MRF, is there any realistic opportunity in the future for us to be in a position to actually be a retail provider to the Sunset Industrial Area at a rate that would be below market with PG&E, thereby making our industrial area more competitive along the lines of a Roseville, or at least a SMUD, right? SMUD's going to be a little bit more expensive, so.
I don't know that we can answer that fully today, but we
Really?
could-
Not
we could-
today?
well,
You couldn't?
you know.
Or any other brain fart I
Maybe-
might have, you're not as good as.
Yeah. What could happen is if that were something that the Middle Fork Finance Authority Board requested an analysis to be done, and you again have two members here, we could go, the staff could go study that and
Well,
bring
I
back
think
answers.
Brett, there are just some very preliminary numbers that could be fairly easily generated that wouldn't require a big study that would let us know within some level of certainty whether it's even worth, you know, pursuing. I think there might.
I can give you a perspective of what we looked at here at Cabin Creek with the biomass facility. We actually, in our negotiations with Liberty Energy, part of it was, could we do that for the county buildings here? Could we keep a bit of the power and sell it for a lower price? And the answer is yes. You can do that. The actual state law allows for that to happen. In our negotiations, it ended up being more economic to sell all of it to them and keep what's going on now happen. But it could be done. I think there's a question of political answers to that and looking at how, you know, do we want to have ratepayers, or then would we be regulated differently? So we would need as staff to go through the analysis of that. Anything to add, Dean, to the process? You've looked at some of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have. I've looked at it a lot, actually. I'm trying to be very careful of my answer.
No need, nobody else is. They address my stupid ideas.
The answer generally to your question is that there's an opportunity there that would certainly have to be looked at and evaluated. The cost of the power itself is one attribute of that effort. So would be the operating costs of setting up and operating an entity to do that. So would be the infrastructure costs, such that there were infrastructure costs associated with doing that. And all those three things have to come together in a way that makes it advantageous for, you know, on a go-forward basis. There's other ways to do it also, though. You can go all the way to becoming a regulated, a municipal utility, which, by the way, wouldn't be regulated by the PUC.
Right.
It would be
Right,
regulated by you guys. Or alternatively, there are things like community choice aggregation, which is allowed currently under law by PG&E and the PUC in the state, which would have us managing a supply portfolio, feeding it through the existing apparatus, and then we would manage the cost of that supply portfolio to try to achieve the objectives of lower prices,
Right.
or greener energy, or a number of other things that could be stated as objectives for that.
Yeah.
But all that is stuff that, for Brad, for any of us to sit here and give you much more than what I've said now would be way,
Right.
way out of step. without
Right,
looking at it.
and obviously, the one thing that would have to remain consistent is that the wholesale price that gets paid for the power generated through the Middle Fork project would have to be a market price. And so then it becomes a function of if this entity, whatever this entity is, that is then responsible for transmission and distribution into the Sunset Industrial Area, is able to offer an end product, having paid that wholesale market price, is able to offer an end product that is lower than what's available out there now, well, then it's worth looking at. But that assumption has to remain constant, that we're not asking for a discounted power sale or anything along those lines. It would simply be whatever this future electrical entity is buying it as opposed to PG&E.
I will let you know that PCWA has actually begun to think about this because they have power demands of the Middle Fork
Right.
project that they have to pay PG&E for. So they are looking into this. I think your suggestion of expanding to other uses, we could perhaps talk to them about that and see what their thoughts are on that.
I think it's a great idea, something I'd love to see that develop more.
Any further questions on this item, John?
I am just feeling a little sad for Andy, who was apparently left out of the what to wear discussion.
Yes, we didn't want to bring that to the attention that he didn't get the email of what to wear. But,
We know he's pretty new, but for crying out loud.
Yeah. I would like to point out that I have brown shoes and Dean has black shoes.
It was a bold move by one of us. I'll open it up to the public, but I think the public is not here. But that being said, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate that. We have now exhausted our public items, and I'm going to turn it over to our county council, who will discuss where we go next with our closed session items.
The board will now adjourn to closed session for a conference with legal counsel on one existing workers' compensation claim, and then for a conference with its labor negotiators regarding PPEO. The board has returned from closed session, which there was a conference with legal counsel, and one item of litigation, workers' compensation litigation, was discussed, and the board gave direction to counsel. There was a conference with labor negotiators. The board met with its labor negotiators regarding PPEO and gave direction to its labor negotiation team. That concludes the closed session report.
All right. This meeting is adjourned.